Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Was Bakugo's Only Anchor? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. The air in the private room was thick with the smell of grilled yakitori, spilled beer, and the roar of overlapping voices. It was a familiar chaos, a weekly ritual that Dynamite no Katsuki, he was off-duty tolerated because it was easier than listening to the extras whine about him never showing up. And then he said my light show blinded the demon civilians more than the villain. Can you believe that? Kaminari wailed, sloshing his drink onto the table for emphasis. It did, dunce face. Katsuki barked from the head of the table, not looking up from his phone where a highlight reel of his latest takedown was already trending. You hit a goddamn school bus with that last arc, idiot. Mina cackled, slapping the table. He's got you there, Sparky. He's just jealous because my fans think my new costume is electrifying. Kaminari shot back, striking a pose that was decidedly less than heroic. Katsuki's head snapped up, a familiar scowl etching his features. Jealous? Of your glittery spandex? The hell I am. My merch sales would bury your entire agency. Kaken's right, though, a softer voice cut through the din from the other side of the table. Izuku. He was nestled between a patiently nodding Todoroki and a fiercely competitive Uraraka, who was in the middle of an intense arm wrestling match with Kirishima. The precision of your quirk is your greatest asset, Kaminari-kun. A focused, high-voltage stun is far more effective than a wide-area blast that risks collateral damage. It's about control, like Kaken's cluster explosions. The table quieted for a half-second, used to Deku's analytical mutterings even in a social setting. Katsuki's scowl didn't vanish, but it shifted. The angry lines around his mouth softened into something closer to smug satisfaction. He met Izuku's gaze across the clutter of plates and bottles. Izuku's eyes were bright, earnest, a small, proud smile playing on his lips just for him. See, Katsuki said, his voice losing its razor edge and gaining a layer of boastful pride. Even Deku gets it. It's not about flash, it's about results. My AP shot variation took down the villain's support beams without a single piece of debris hitting the crowd. Flawless victory. Oh, here we go, Zero groaned good-naturedly. The Dynamite Hero Hour begins. Shut it, Tape Arms. But the damage, or rather, the praise was done. Izuku leaned forward, ignoring the groans. It was more than flawless, Kaken. The way you calculated the structural weak points mid-swing. It was incredible. You saved the entire operation. The words settled over Katsuki like a warm blanket. He preened under them, under that unwavering, green-eyed admiration. He grunted, looking back at his phone as if bored, but the tips of his ears turned pink. Course I did. Someone's gotta show you all how it's done. The unbeatable power duo strikes again. Kirishima chimed in, finally pinning Uraraka's arm with a triumphant shout. You two are always on the same wavelength in the field. It's manly as hell. It's because they're basically the same person, Mina giggled. One's all die, and the other's all smiley, but they're both nerds who live for hero stats. The table erupted in laughter. Katsuki shot up, yelling something about Pinky needing to watch her mouth, but the protest was half-hearted. The title power duo didn't irritate him as much as it used to. In the public eye, it was a brand, a story of rivalry turned respectful partnership. The media ate it up. He chanced another look at Izuku, who was now laughing at something Todoroki had said, a light blush on his cheeks from the beer and the attention. In the vibrant, noisy warmth of the izakaya, surrounded by their closest friends, their secret felt like a live wire humming just beneath the floorboards. A thrilling, dangerous energy that only the two of them could feel. Katsuki sat back down, a smirk finally tugging at his lips. He let the noise of his friends wash over him, basking in the dual spotlights of public adoration and a single, private source of praise that fed something in him far deeper than his ego. For now, it was enough. Sunlight, harsh and unfiltered, streamed into Katsuki's penthouse apartment, glinting off the minimalist chrome and glass surfaces. The enormous wall-mounted television was tuned to the morning's most popular hero gossip show, Hero HQ, the hosts' voices chirpy and artificially bright. And the big talk this week is, of course, the new official hero Billboard chart JP rankings. Some shakeups in the top 10. Katsuki sat on the back of his sofa, a bowl of spicy miso soup in one hand, his eyes narrowed at the screen. He was already in half his hero costume, the heavy grenade bracers sitting on the coffee table like dormant weapons. Holding strong at number 4, the symbol of hope himself, Deku. A flash of Izuku's beaming face, green lightning crackling around him as he lifted a collapsed beam from a group of civilians, filled the screen. Katsuki's jaw tightened. He shoveled a spoonful of soup into his mouth. And right on his tail, climbing one spot to claim the number 5 position, the explosive powerhouse, Dynamite. The screen cut to a slow-motion reel of Katsuki's latest takedown. A perfectly aimed howitzer impact that spun through the air, a vortex of fire and concussive force that enveloped a giant robot villain without touching the surrounding buildings. The editors had even added a dramatic guitar riff. A feral grin spread across Katsuki's face. That's more like it. The eternal question. The second host, a man with a flamboyant quirk that made his hair change color with his intonation, trilled. Will Dynamite ever finally overtake his former rival and childhood friend? They're so close in the rankings, it's truly a battle for the ages. It's not a battle, Katsuki snarled at the screen, as if the hosts could hear him. It's a foregone conclusion. I'm just taking my DMN time. They do make an incredible team, though, the first host mused. The power duo tag is really sticking. The public can't get enough of them. Oh, absolutely. The perfect blend of raw power and compassionate strategy. A match made in hero heaven. A match made in hell, Katsuki muttered, though the praise for their combined effectiveness pricked at his ego pleasantly. He'd never admit it, but fighting alongside Deku was like playing a complex, violent duet where they both knew every note by heart. The lock on his front door clicked open. Speak of the devil. Izuku walked in, already in his full hero suit, holding a paper bag from Katsuki's favorite bakery. Morning, Kaken. I saw you were almost out of milk. He nodded toward the TV. Watching your fan club? Shut up. They're talking about the rankings. Katsuki pointed his spoon at the screen. They get it. They see which one of us is actually moving up. Izuku just smiled, that infuriatingly gentle, knowing smile, and placed the bakery bag on the counter. They also said we're a match made in hero heaven. They're a couple of idiots who wouldn't know a good hero if one exploded in their face. Emchum. Izuku pulled out a still-warm anpan and took a bite. Your howitzer impact was flawless in that clip. The spin control you've developed to minimize the shockwave radius. It's a real innovation. I was analyzing it last night. The irritation from the rankings bled away, replaced by a warm, familiar flush of pride. Katsuki tried to fight the smirk off his face and failed. Course it is. Told you I was working on it. I know. It's amazing, Kaken. It was always like this. The public praise was fine, it was fuel, but it was generic. It was for Dynamite. What Izuku gave him was specific, technical, and reverent. It was for Katsuki. It was the difference between a spotlight and the sun. An hour later, they were leaving the Hero Public Safety Commission's main tower together after a standard post-ranking debrief. The second they hit the top of the marble steps, a cacophony of shouts and the blinding flash of camera bulbs erupted. Dynamite. Over here. Deku. A word on the new rankings. Is there a rivalry? Do you think you can beat him? Look this way. Together. Katsuki immediately slipped into his public persona. He shoved his hands in his pockets, stuck his chin out, and leveled a glare at the throng of reporters. Beat him? I'm already ahead. These numbers are a formality. It was a lie, but a good one. It sounded confident. Izuku, ever the diplomat, just laughed sheepishly and rubbed the back of his neck. We just focus on doing our best to help people. We're not really competing with each other. Like hell we're not. Katsuki grumbled under his breath, just loud enough for the microphones to pick up and for the reporters to titter with delight. The perfect soundbite. The image of the friendly, competitive rivals. They descended the steps side by side, a study in contrasts. Katsuki, a storm cloud of aggressive confidence in black and orange, and Izuku, a beacon of friendly strength in green and white. The cameras ate it up. They knew it. They'd performed this dance 100 times. By the afternoon, the photos were everywhere. A particularly good one of them, Katsuki mid-snarl, Izuku mid-laugh, was trending on social media. The caption read, "The power duo, still going strong. #rivals, #Deku, #dynamite, #Bakugo." Katsuki scowled at his phone in the back of his agency's car. The shipping name was ridiculous. Always had been. He clicked on the tag. The top post was a side-by-side comparison of their stats from the last year, with a poll, who had the better year. He voted for himself, then scowled deeper when he saw he was only winning by 52% to 48%. But as he scrolled, he saw other posts. Edits of the two of them, photoshopped to be closer together. Fans writing short, embarrassingly earnest paragraphs about their unbreakable bond and unspoken understanding. His ego flared, hot and bright. They were talking about him. They were always talking about him. And they were talking about him with Deku. The two of them, together at the top of the world. It was where they were always meant to be. He didn't hate it. He just hated that they could never know how right they truly were. For a fleeting second, he imagined what would happen if he just grabbed Izuku's hand the next time they were on those steps. The thought was so terrifying and alien that his own palms sparked slightly in his pockets, a tiny, contained explosion that no one else could see. He quickly quashed the thought, locking it away. This was enough. The spotlight, the rivalry, the secret praise. It was all under his control. It had to be. The lock on the door clicked shut, and the world outside ceased to exist. The transition was as jarring as it was routine. One moment, they were Dynamite and Deku on the street, parting ways with a casual, "see you around, nerd," for the benefit of anyone who might be watching. The next, they were just Katsuki and Izuku, standing in the silent, warm dimness of Izuku's apartment. The silence was different here. In public, silence was a void Katsuki felt compelled to fill with noise and aggression. Here, it was a comfortable blanket, a space that required no performance. Izuku's place was a reflection of its owner, warm, slightly cluttered, and filled with quiet purpose. Books on hero theory and quirk analysis were stacked neatly on every surface. A framed All Might poster shared wall space with a more recent, action shot photo of the two of them from their third year at UA. Katsuki shrugged off his jacket, letting it drop unceremoniously onto the floor by the Genkin. Izuku would pick it up later, hanging it neatly in the closet without a word of complaint. It was part of their unspoken ritual. "Your takedown of that hydrokinetic villain today was incredible, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice soft, already shedding his own jacket. He wasn't looking at Katsuki, he was fussing with the kettle in the small kitchenette, but the words were deliberate. They were the true key that unlocked the door. A grunt was Katsuki's only reply, but he didn't stop him. He leaned against the doorframe, watching. "The way you used the steam from your explosions to disorient him before he could solidify the water around you. I rewound the agency feed 3 times. Izuku turned now, his eyes alight with that familiar, analytical fire. It was a look he never gave the cameras. This was his true fanboy mode, and it was reserved for one person only. "Your situational awareness is getting scarily good. You calculated the humidity, the wind direction from the open bay doors. It was a complete environmental analysis in a split second. Amazing." Each word was a drop of water on parched earth. Katsuki felt the tension of the day, the press, the rankings, the constant need to be on seep from his shoulders. He pushed off the doorframe and walked further into the room, his posture loosening. He was an amateur, Katsuki dismissed, but his tone lacked its usual bite. It was almost inviting. A prompt for more. He was a Class A threat with a quirk that could have flooded the entire industrial block. Izuku corrected gently, stepping closer. He reached out, not to touch Katsuki, but to gently trace the line of one of the grenade bracers still on Katsuki's arms. A technician admiring a perfect machine. You neutralized him without a single civilian casualty or significant property damage. You made it look easy. But it wasn't. It was brilliant. There was the word. Brilliant. Katsuki's breath hitched just slightly. He finally met Izuku's gaze. The green of his eyes was deep, unwavering, filled with a sincerity that was almost painful to look at. There was no artifice there, no ulterior motive. Just pure, unadulterated admiration. It was the fuel that ran his entire goddamn life. He reached up, his movements uncharacteristically slow, and cupped the back of Izuku's neck, pulling him in. Izuku went willingly, his eyes fluttering shut a second before their lips met. The kiss wasn't soft or sweet. It was messy and possessive, acclaiming. It was Katsuki's way of swallowing the praise whole, of taking the admiration he so desperately craved and converting it into a physical language he could understand. Izuku kissed him back with equal fervor, his hands coming up to grip the front of Katsuki's costume, holding on as if he were the anchor in a stormy sea. This was their secret. Not just the SEC, the tangled limbs in Izuku's bed later, the bitten-off curses and breathless sighs in the dark. The quiet moments of worship before any of that even started. The way Izuku would catalog his every victory and polish it until it shone, then offer it up like a gift. The way Katsuki would accept it, not with thanks, but with a rough sort of hunger that said more, always more. Later, lying in the dim light with Izuku's head on his chest, tracing idle patterns on his scarred back, Katsuki felt the familiar, smug satisfaction settle in his bones. This was better than any ranking, any headline. This was real. This was his. The old hag is expecting us for dinner next week, he muttered into the quiet, his fingers stilling on Izuku's skin. Don't be late. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. But it was also a fragile offering, a piece of his outside world he was willing to let Izuku step into, even if they had to wear masks while they were there. Izuku shifted, propping his chin on Katsuki's chest to look up at him. His smile was small, a little sad around the edges, but genuine. I'll be there. He knew what it cost Katsuki to even offer this much. He saw the conflict that always churned behind those fierce red eyes, the want warring with the fear. And for now, for tonight, Izuku was fine with it. The love he felt was a vast, deep ocean, and his need for acknowledgement was just a small boat on its surface. It was easy to ignore the slow leak in the hull when the water was so deep. He would take whatever pieces of Katsuki he was given. He would feed his ego with both hands until he was full. He just hoped, one day, it would be enough to make Katsuki feel strong enough to love him back in the light. The rain was a cold, relentless curtain, washing the grime of the city and the copper tang of blood into the gutters. The aftermath of the villain attack was a symphony of sirens and shouted orders, but to Katsuki Bakugo, it was all muffled, distant static. He stood apart from the triage units, his shoulders heaving under the weight of his sodden costume. His right arm hung at a wrong angle, dislocated and hastily popped back into place by a medic on site. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep ache and a tremor in his hands that had nothing to do with the cold. They'd won. A low-level wannabe warlord with a matter disintegration quirk, holed up in a downtown bank with 20 hostages. It should have been clean. It wasn't. A child. There'd been a child hidden behind a counter the intel had missed. Katsuki's final, fight-ending explosion had blown out the entire front of the building. He'd calculated the blast radius to the millimeter, but a support beam had given way, a cascade of debris heading right for where the kid had been hiding. He hadn't thought. His body had moved on its own, a desperate, diving tackle that shoved the kid into a safety zone a second before several hundred pounds of concrete and rebar slammed into his side. His ribs were a symphony of pain, each breath a sharp, stabbing reminder. He'd saved the kid. The mission was a success. Dynamite was being hailed on the police bands for his selfless, quick-thinking action. So why did he feel like he was about to shatter? Kaken. The voice was soft, cutting through the haze of rain and pain. Izuku emerged from the chaos, his own costume torn and smeared with ash, his curls plastered to his forehead. He'd been handling the evacuation, herding civilians to safety with a calm efficiency that always set Katsuki off. He looked steady, an anchor in the churning water. Katsuki turned his head away, scowling. What do you want, Deku? Come to gloat? See the great dynamite almost screw up? He expected an argument, a pep talk, some nauseatingly optimistic crap. He didn't expect Izuku to stop right in front of him, his green eyes scanning Katsuki's face with an intensity that felt like being physically dissected. The structural analysis of that building was flawed from the start. The blueprints the police provided were 6 years out of date. There was no way you could have known that beam was compromised, Izuku said, his voice low and urgent, meant only for him. You reacted on pure instinct. You saw the threat and you moved faster than anyone else could have. You didn't almost screw up, Kaken. You saved everyone. The words shouldn't have mattered. They were just words. But they were the right words. They weren't empty praise, they were a tactical breakdown, an absolution written in the language Katsuki understood best. They pinpointed the exact source of his failure and reframed it as a victory he hadn't even seen. The tightness in Katsuki's chest didn't ease, but it shifted. The tremor in his hands got worse. He was just a kid, Katsuki ground out, the admission ripped from him, raw and unwilling. It was the core of it. The vulnerability he spent every waking moment trying to armorplate. He was so dim and small. Izuku didn't flinch. He just took another step closer, into Katsuki's space, ignoring the rain and the watching world. His gaze was unwavering, filled with a ferocity that mirrored Katsuki's own, but directed outward, in his defense. I know, Izuku said. And you saved him. You were amazing. Amazing. The word hit him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't the media's hollow, incredible, or the public's cheering, awesome. It was Izuku's word. The word from childhood, loaded with a history of yearning and admiration that spanned their entire lives. The carefully constructed dam inside Katsuki cracked. His vision blurred, not from the rain. He squeezed his eyes shut, a ragged breath tearing from his throat. He was falling apart, right here on the street, and the only thing holding him together was the green-haired nerd he'd spent a lifetime trying to surpass. He felt a hand, warm despite the cold rain, gently cup his cheek. His eyes flew open in shock. Izuku was right there, his expression a heartbreaking mix of awe and determination. He wasn't looking at the dynamite. He was looking at Katsuki. Just Katsuki. Bloody, broken, and terrified of being weak. You're always amazing, Kaken, Izuku whispered, his thumb stroking a faint, clean line through the grime on Katsuki's cheek. And then he leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't graceful. It was rain-wet and desperate, tasting of blood and relief and years of unspoken things. It was an answer to a question Katsuki had been too afraid to ask. It was a lifeline. Katsuki froze for a half-second, every instinct screaming to shove him away, to explode, to deny. But he was so tired. And Izuku's lips were soft, and his hand was steady, and he tasted like safety. With a broken, shuddering gasp, Katsuki kissed him back. It was all teeth and desperation, a surrender and a claim all at once. His good hand came up, in the wet fabric of Izuku's torn costume, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly turned to liquid. The memory faded, leaving him in the warm, quiet stillness of Izuku's present-day bedroom. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating Izuku sleeping peacefully beside him, one hand curled loosely on the pillow near Katsuki's head. Katsuki was wide awake, watching the slow rise and fall of Izuku's chest. The ghost of that first kiss, born from vulnerability and salvation, lingered on his skin. He'd let Izuku see him break that day. He'd shown him the cracked foundation beneath the dynamite persona, and instead of recoiling, Izuku had kissed him. He'd built their entire relationship on that moment. But now, years later, the fear was different. It wasn't the fear of almost failing. It was the fear of that moment being captured, photographed, and splashed across every news outlet in the country. The fear of the world seeing that crack, that need, and calling it weakness. The fear of that sacred, life-saving kiss being turned into a cheap headline, a scandal, a talking point for bigots. He looked at Izuku's sleeping face, so open and trusting. He had given Katsuki everything that night: absolution, acceptance, love. And all Katsuki could give him in return was a secret. He turned onto his back, staring at the darkened ceiling, the echo of rain, and a whispered, "You were amazing," the only sound in the quiet room. The love felt like a bomb in his chest, and he was terrified of the person holding the detonator was himself. The roar of the crowd was a physical thing, a wall of sound that vibrated through the concrete stands of the Jaku City Arena. On the field below, the Pro Hero obstacle course relay was reaching its chaotic climax. And it's cellophane with the grappling hook assist. He sends charge bolts sailing over the acid moat O, but in Naseirashi from Shiketsu's team is bringing in a gale force wind. From the luxury box reserved for the top 10 and their guests, Katsuki had a perfect, smug view of the chaos. He leaned forward, elbows on the railing, a vicious grin splitting his face as Denki Kaminari charge bolt was sent wildly off course, shrieking as he pinwheeled through the air before landing in a heap on the next platform over. He totally misjudged the wind shear. Katsuki barked, slapping the railing. Should have used a lower amperage arc to minimize his profile. Basic physics. Beside him, Ijiro Kirishima laughed, his sharp teeth gleaming. Give him a break, man. He's trying his best. It's looking pretty manly out there. Tisish, trying doesn't cut it when you're eating artificial turf, Katsuki scoffed, but there was no real malice in it. This was their version of fun. The box was filled with their usual crew. Mina was on her feet, cheering wildly for her agency mate. Siro was critiquing his own performance on the field with a wince. And Izuku was a few seats down, muttering a mile a minute to a patiently listening Uraraka, no doubt analyzing every competitor's quirk usage and strategy. It was comfortable. Familiar. For a moment, Katsuki could almost forget the tension thrumming under his own skin. The event ended with a victory for a team from the Philippines, and their group eventually trickled out, heading for the parking lot. The mood was light, buoyed by the spectacle and the shared camaraderie of a day off. "Man, I'm starving," Kirishima announced, slinging a heavy, friendly arm around Katsuki's shoulders. "Barbecue? My treat. To celebrate not making a complete fool of myself out there." "You were plenty foolish, shitty hair," Katsuki grumbled, but he didn't shrug him off. "I'm in," Mina chirped, skipping ahead. "Deku, Uraraka, you guys coming?" Izuku smiled, that easy, public smile he'd perfected. "Sure. Just let me check in with my agency first. Kaken, you need to call yours about the press inquiry on the hydrokinetic arrest, right?" It was a simple, logical question. A standard piece of shop talk between two top heroes who worked closely together. But it was also a carefully crafted signal. "Meet me around the corner in 5 so we can arrive separately." Katsuki gave a curt nod. "Yeah, whatever. Don't take forever, nerd." He pulled out his phone, pretending to dial, already turning away to find a spot of privacy to make the fake call. He didn't see the look that passed between Mina and Kaminari. By the time they were all squeezed around a sizzling grill in a noisy barbecue joint, the third round of beers had been served and inhibitions were low. "So, seriously," Kaminari said, waving a piece of grilled kalbi in Katsuki's direction. "You and Deku are, like, weirdly joined at the hip these days." Katsuki froze, a piece of meat halfway to his mouth. "The hell's that supposed to mean?" "I mean," Kaminari continued, oblivious to the warning glint in Katsuki's eyes, "you're always together. Joint patrols, press cons, grabbing lunch. It's like you're back at UA, but without the attempted murder." Mina leaned in, her pink eyes sparkling with mischief. "Oh, I know what this is. It's a bromance. You're having mandate nights, aren't you? Watching action movies and arguing about whose ultimate move is cooler." The table erupted in laughter. Siro fake wiped a tear from his eye. "I can see it now. No, my explosion is manlier. No, my Delaware smash has better form." Even Kirishima was chuckling. "Come on, guys, they're just a good team. The power duo thing is real." But the seed was planted. The joke was out in the open, harmless and silly. To everyone but Katsuki. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, poured down his spine. His heart hammered against his ribs. They know. How do they know? Did someone see us? Did Deku slip up? The paranoid thoughts, usually so well contained, exploded behind his eyes. He reacted the only way he knew how. With overwhelming, defensive force. He slammed his hands on the table, making the dishes rattle. Small, harmless sparks popped from his palms. "Shut the hell up," he roared, his voice cutting through the laughter like a knife. "What the F kind of idiotic shit is that? Mandates? It's called being a professional, you dumb extras. We work together because we're the best, not because we're. He couldn't even say it. The word boyfriends, lovers, together felt like acid on his tongue. His face was flushed a deep, furious red. The table went dead silent. The laughter died instantly, replaced by startled, wide-eyed stares. Kaminari held up his hands in surrender. "Whoa, dude, chill. It was a joke. A bad one, sorry." Mina's smirk had vanished, replaced by a slightly hurt confusion. "Yeah, Bakugo, we were just kidding around. You don't have to go nuclear." Kirishima was looking at him, his red eyes narrowed not in anger, but in quiet, thoughtful concern. He saw past the explosion. He always did. He saw the panic. "Hey man," he said, his voice low and calm. "It's cool. No one's accusing you of anything." But the damage was done. The fun, relaxed atmosphere was shattered. Katsuki stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm out. This is stupid. And you're all a bunch of morons." He didn't look at Izuku. He couldn't. He threw a wad of cash on the table, far more than his share, and stormed out of the restaurant, leaving a wake of awkward silence behind him. Across the table, Izuku had gone very still. He watched Katsuki's retreating back, his own smile long gone. He saw the explosion for what it was, not anger, but pure, unadulterated fear. He saw how quickly Katsuki was willing to torch a fun night with their closest friends, how violently he would reject even the joking notion of them being together. The group's laughter had been a gentle tease. But Katsuki's reaction had been a declaration. Izuku forced a laugh, a hollow, shaky sound. "Wow, he's really passionate about his professional partnerships, huh?" he said, trying to salvage the wreckage of the evening. The others slowly started talking again, the conversation strained. The joke was dead, but its ghost lingered at the table. And Izuku felt the first real, cold trickle of doubt. He had told himself he was fine with being a secret. But he hadn't realized the secret meant being a source of shame so potent it could detonate like a bomb at a simple, silly joke. He picked at his food, his appetite gone, the echo of Katsuki's furious denial ringing in his ears. Sunlight streamed through the large windows of ground beta, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The air hummed with the residual energy of activated quirks and the sharp, focused shouts of students. "Remember your footwork, Aoki. Your quirk is rooted. You're an oak tree, not a willow branch. Good. Now, Hana, use the opening he created. Don't just watch, support." Izuku Midoriya moved through the controlled chaos of the training exercise like a conductor, his voice calm but firm, his eyes missing nothing. He wasn't Deku, the number 4 hero, in this moment. He was Midoriya-sensei. And he was in his element. A first-year student, a boy with a powerful but unwieldy vibration quirk, was struggling. His attacks were too wild, his control slipping with his frustration. He let out a cry of annoyance as another vibration blast went wide, cracking a chunk of faux building facade. "I can't do it," the boy gritted out, his shoulders slumping. "It's too much. I'm just going to hurt someone." Izuku was at his side in an instant. He didn't yell. He didn't compare him to anyone else. He simply placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, grounding him. "Take a breath, Kenji," he said, his voice low and steady. "Your power isn't the problem. Your fear of it is. You're focusing on the force and not the frequency. Feel it here," he said, tapping the boy's sternum. "Control the pulse before you ever release it. You're not trying to break the world. You're trying to speak to it. Now try again. Smaller. So small you can barely feel it." He took a step back, giving the boy space. Kenji closed his eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath, and focused. This time, when he raised his hands, the air around them didn't roar, it hummed, a fine, precise tremor that shook the gravel at his feet without so much as cracking a single pebble. The boy's eyes flew open, wide with astonishment and dawning pride. A brilliant, beaming smile spread across Izuku's face, so bright it could have powered the entire campus. That's exactly like that. That's control, Kenji. That's your power. Amazing. The word was out of his mouth before he could stop it. Amazing. The same word he used for Katsuki. The thought was like a splash of cold water. The smile on his face didn't fade, but it became fixed, a little strained at the edges. He clapped Kenji on the back, offering more encouragement, but his mind was suddenly elsewhere. Later, back in his homeroom, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the desks, the feeling lingered. His students were packing their bags, chattering excitedly about the day's training. A hand went up. It was Aiko, a bright-eyed girl with a telekinetic quirk she activated by whistling. "Yes, Aiko-chan?" "Midoriya-sensei," she began, her voice curious and without a hint of malice. "You're always talking about teamwork and trusting your partner. Do you have a partner? Like, a hero partner? Or, a life partner?" The chatter in the room died down. Every student turned to look at him, their expressions openly curious. To them, he wasn't just a hero, he was a window into their own futures. They wanted to know what a hero's life looked like on and off the clock. Izuku felt his blood run cold. The fixed smile from the training ground returned to his lips, automatic and hollow. "I do. His name is Katsuki. He's the most brilliant, infuriating, incredible person I've ever known. He loves spicy curry and hates losing. He's terrible at mornings and his laugh is rare and sounds like gravel and sunshine. He's my best friend and the love of my life, and I have to pretend he's just a colleague because the idea of anyone knowing about us makes him so afraid he'd rather explode than admit it." The truth sat on his tongue, a live wire. He swallowed it down. He forced a light, easygoing laugh that sounded fake to his own ears. "A life partner? That's a big question," he deflected, rubbing the back of his neck in a gesture that was pure all-might, a nervous habit he'd never shaken. "My focus right now is on all of you, and on being the best hero I can be. It's important for heroes to remember that our duty to the public can sometimes mean putting personal attachments second." The words tasted like ash. They were a lie wrapped in a half-truth. He was parroting the very excuse Katsuki used, and it felt like a betrayal of himself and of the wide-eyed students looking up at him. He saw a flicker of understanding in some of their eyes, and a flicker of disappointment in others. They'd been hoping for a fairy tale, a story of a hero who could have it all. He had just taught them, explicitly, that they couldn't. The bell rang, saving him. The moment passed as students shuffled out, their minds already on dinner and homework. Izuku stood alone at the front of the empty classroom, the silence pressing in on him. He walked to the window, looking out at the UA grounds. This was his sanctuary. A place built on truth, on nurturing potential, on helping young people become their best, most authentic selves. And here he was, living a double life. Preaching honesty while practicing deception. Teaching his students to be proud of who they were while he himself was hiding the most important part of his own identity. He thought of Kenji's proud face when he'd mastered his vibration. He thought of the trust in his students' eyes. He couldn't look at them tomorrow and tell them to be brave if he was continuing to be a coward in his own life. The leak in the boat wasn't so small anymore. The water was rising, and Izuku was starting to feel like he was drowning. The silence in Izuku's apartment was a living thing. It was no longer the comfortable blanket from before, but a heavy, expectant fog. The only sounds were the soft rustle of fabric and the distant, muted hum of city traffic 20 stories below. Katsuki was stretched out on the sofa, his head in Izuku's lap, eyes closed. Izuku's fingers were carting slowly through his spiky, surprisingly soft hair. It was a rare moment of pure, unasked-for tranquility. The press of the day, the lingering awkwardness from the barbecue incident, the weight of his own lies to his students, it all receded, leaving only the simple, tactile reality of Katsuki's warmth against him. For a moment, it was enough. It was everything. Izuku looked down at the face relaxed in sleep, the sharp lines softened, the permanent scowl smoothed away. This was the Katsuki no one else saw. The one who trusted him enough to be vulnerable, to be quiet. The one he had saved in the rain. The words came out before he could stop them, soft and tentative, barely a whisper into the quiet room. It might not be so bad if people knew. The effect was instantaneous. The warmth beneath Izuku's fingers vanished. Katsuki's body went rigid. His eyes snapped open, and the vulnerability was gone, replaced by a sharp, defensive glare. He shoved himself upright, away from Izuku's touch as if burned. "The hell did you just say?" The venom in his tone was a physical slap. Izuku's hand hovered in the empty air where Katsuki's head had been, feeling suddenly cold. "I just meant..." Izuku started, his voice faltering. He hadn't meant to start a fight. He'd just been musing, hoping. "We're so careful all the time. At the barbecue, you got so angry and I just thought, if it wasn't a secret, we wouldn't have to." "We wouldn't have to?" Katsuki interrupted, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He was on his feet now, pacing like a caged animal. "This isn't about we, Deku. This is about my career. My reputation. Everything I've built." "Our careers are fine," Izuku insisted, standing as well, his own frustration beginning to prickle. "We're in the top 5. People love us. They call us the power duo, for crying out loud." "Exactly." Katsuki whirled on him, jabbing a finger in his direction. "The power duo. Not the power couple. There's a difference. A big, tiny difference. You think those vultures out there would keep loving us if they knew? You think the commission would keep handing us the same high-profile jobs? It would be a circus. A demon sideshow." He was shouting now, his voice echoing off the walls. Every mission report, every press conference, every DMN thing would be about us. Not about the work. Not about being the best. It would be, are Dynamite and Deku having a lover's spat? Did that villain get away because you two were fighting over who does the dishes? It would ruin everything. "You don't know that," Izuku said, but his voice was weaker. He could see it, the tabloid headlines Katsuki was painting, and a part of him knew it wasn't entirely unrealistic. "I know everything about how that world works." Katsuki roared. "They build you up just to tear you down. And they'd use us to do it. They'd call us weak. Distracted. They'd say I'm not focused. They'd. He trailed off, but Izuku heard the unspoken words. They'd say I'm not a real man. The deepest, oldest fear, the one born from a childhood of misunderstanding his own aggression, the one Izuku had seen in the rain. The anger drained from Izuku as quickly as it had come, replaced by a weary, hollow sadness. He looked at Katsuki, really looked at him. Not at Dynamite, the unbeatable hero, but at the terrified boy from Aldra Middle School who was still trying to prove he was the strongest, because being anything else was unthinkable. He saw the panic, the raw animal fear. And he understood. This wasn't about logistics or career moves. This was about a fundamental part of Katsuki's soul that believed love was a vulnerability. And vulnerability was a death sentence. Izuku's shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him. He took a step back, creating a physical chasm to match the emotional one that had just cracked open between them. "You're right," he said softly, looking at the floor. "I'm sorry, Kaken. I wasn't thinking. It was a stupid thing to say." He was giving him the out. Feeding the ego to soothe the fear. It was what he always did. The tension in Katsuki's shoulders eased slightly at the retreat. The immediate threat was over. He ran a hand through his hair, his breathing still slightly ragged. "Demon right, it was stupid," he muttered, but the heat was gone from his voice, replaced by a gruff weariness. "Just don't bring that sheet up again. Ever." He didn't wait for an answer. He walked to the door, grabbing his jacket. "I'm going home. I've got an early patrol." The door clicked shut behind him. Izuku stood alone in the middle of the room, the silence now deafening. He replayed the conversation in his head, his own hopeful whisper, Katsuki's explosive fear, his own quick surrender. The seed was planted. But it wasn't a seed of hope. It was a seed of realization. Katsuki would always choose his image first. His reputation. The carefully constructed fortress of dynamite. He would choose it over late-night talks, over quiet moments on the sofa, over Izuku's happiness. Over them. Izuku walked to the window, wrapping his arms around himself. He watched the tiny figure of Katsuki emerge on the street below, shoulders hunched against the night, walking away without a backward glance. The love was still there, a vast and aching thing in his chest. But for the first time, it was accompanied by a cold, clear certainty. He was fine with it. Until he wasn't. And after tonight, he wasn't sure how much longer fine was going to last. The National Hero Gala was a spectacle of almost absurd opulence. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars dripped light onto a sea of designer gowns and impeccably tailored tuxedos. The air buzzed with the clinking of champagne flutes, the murmur of polite conversation, and the relentless, paparazzi-ready smiles of Japan's top heroes. Izuku Midoriya stood near a towering ice sculpture of the HPSC logo, feeling profoundly out of place. His suit, though expensive and well-fitted, felt like a costume. He clutched a glass of sparkling water, watching the crowd swirl around him. He'd come alone, of course. He'd allowed himself a foolish, private hope. After the tense standoff in his apartment, a part of him, the part that still believed in fairy tale endings, had wondered if Katsuki might change his mind. That the fear of losing him might outweigh the fear of the spotlight. That hope had died a quick death 2 days ago. "You think I'm showing up with you on my arm? You stupid or something?" Katsuki's voice had been a scoff, laced with that familiar derision that was meant to push him away. "It's a media circus. I'm not giving them a single thread to pull on. I'm going alone." And so he was. Izuku watched him now from across the ballroom. Katsuki Bakugo was in his element. He held court, not with a crowd, but as a singular force of nature. He stood with a small group of top 10 heroes, including a jovial best jeanist and a happy Mirko, but all eyes were on him. He wasn't smiling, but he wore a look of arrogant, effortless command. He held a glass of whiskey, gesturing with it as he held forth on some topic, his voice a confident rumble that cut through the polite chatter. Cameras flashed around him, and he didn't flinch. He preened. He was dynamite, the explosive superstar, and he was performing perfectly. Izuku's heart ached with a familiar, twisted pride. He was so and beautiful like this, a king in his chosen kingdom. Then she arrived. Setsuna Tokage Lizardy, the number 22 hero, made an entrance. Her dress was a sleek, emerald green affair that seemed to shift and shimmer like scales as she moved. Her smile was sharp and clever, her eyes missing nothing as she glided through the crowd. She was known for her wit, her strategic mind, and a confidence that bordered on playful arrogance. She made a beeline for the top 10 group, exchanging easy greetings with best jeanist before her eyes landed on Katsuki. A smirk played on her lips. Izuku watched, frozen, as she tapped Katsuki on the shoulder. He turned, his expression initially annoyed until he saw who it was. His scowl didn't exactly vanish, but it transmuted into something else, a look of challenging recognition. They'd worked together before. Their quirks complemented each other well in wide-scale operations. Tokage said something, her head tilted. Izuku was too far to hear, but he saw Katsuki's mouth quirk up in a half-smirk. He retorted with something that made her throw her head back and laugh, a real, unguarded laugh, not the polished titter of the socialites around them. A photographer, sensing a good shot, moved in. Tokage, ever media-savvy, didn't shy away. She leaned in slightly, saying something else to Katsuki while flipping her hair over her shoulder in a practiced move. Katsuki, never one to be upstaged, leaned in as well, his smirk widening as he delivered another line. The camera flashed, capturing the image perfectly, the stunning, clever number 22 and the brilliant, abrasive number 5, heads close together, sharing a laugh. It looked easy, natural, acceptable. The air left Izuku's lungs. This was what Katsuki wanted. This was what he considered safe. A pretty, high-ranking female hero. A potential power couple, the media could ship without a second thought. No secret whispers, no hidden shame. Just a straightforward, marketable narrative. The hollow feeling from his apartment returned, cavernous and cold. He saw it all with devastating clarity. Katsuki wouldn't just choose his image over them. He would eventually replace them with a more palatable version. One that didn't require him to be brave. He couldn't watch anymore. He turned away, setting his untouched glass on a passing tray, and made for the nearest balcony, needing air, needing to escape the suffocating glow of Katsuki's public perfection. Out in the cool night air, he gripped the stone balustrade, looking down at the glittering city. He could still hear the muted sounds of the gala behind him. The memory of Katsuki and Tokage, laughing and photogenic, was burned onto his retinas. The ultimatum, once a vague, scary idea, began to solidify in his mind. It was no longer an if. It was a when. Inside, Katsuki finally extracted himself from Tokage, his ego pleasantly stroked by the easy banter and the attention. He scanned the room out of habit, looking for a head of green hair. He saw the empty space by the ice sculpture instead. A faint, inexplicable twinge of something disappointment, guilt, pricked at him. He shoved it down immediately. Good, he thought, turning back to accept another glass of champagne. He's being smart. Keeping his distance. It was better this way. Safer. He told himself that all night, even as he caught himself looking toward the doors a little too often, waiting for a presence that never returned. The silence of Katsuki's penthouse was absolute. It was a curated silence, expensive and imposing, all reinforced concrete and soundproofed windows. It was the silence of a fortress. But tonight, it was the silence of a tomb. The press of the gala, the whiskey, the easy, meaningless flirtation with Tokage, it had all been a layer of armor. Now, stripped bare in the dark, the armor was gone. He dreamed. It wasn't a dream of villains or falling buildings. It was simpler and far worse. He was small. His hands were tiny, pudgy, and they sparked with pathetic, fizzling pops instead of earth-shattering blasts. He was back in the Aldra Middle School courtyard. The other kids weren't faceless. He saw them clearly. Their mouths were moving, but the sound was distorted, a low, buzzing hum. He couldn't hear the words, but he felt them. They were needles pricking his skin. Freak. Try hard. Why is he so angry all the time? He's gonna blow up one day. He turned and there was Izuku. But not the Izuku of now. This was the old Izuku. Small, fragile, with wide, watery eyes filled with a hope that felt like an accusation. It's okay, Kaken, Dream Izuku said, but his voice was the deep, sure voice of the man he would become. It was wrong. You don't have to be so loud. It's okay to be scared. I'm not scared. Katsuki screamed, but the words came out as a reedy, powerless squeak. His explosions were nothing but smoke. The other kids pointed and laughed, the buzzing hum rising to a deafening roar. Their faces morphed, melting into the leering faces of paparazzi, microphones jabbing at him like weapons. Dynamite. Is it true? A secret lover? Does it make you weak? What would your fans say? Are you AF? The final word was swallowed by the noise, but he knew what it was. The oldest, most poisonous insult. The one that had been whispered about boys who didn't fight right, who liked the wrong things, who showed weakness. The word that meant you were less than. Other. Contemptible. He looked down at his hands. They were his adult hands, powerful and scarred, but they were holding Izuku's hand. Their fingers were laced together. He tried to let go, to shove him away, but he couldn't. His grip was like a vice. He looked up and saw his own reflection in the lenses of the cameras. But it wasn't Dynamite staring back. It was that small, furious, terrified little boy, holding another boy's hand, and everyone was laughing. Weak. The crowd chanted, their voices merging into one. Weak. Katsuki woke with a strangled gasp, bolting upright in bed. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs, sweat plastering his t-shirt to his back. The sheets were tangled around his legs, a prison. He essayed in ragged breaths, fists clenched in the expensive Egyptian cotton. The echo of the dream, the laughter, The word weak reverberated in his skull. F dash. He hissed into the darkness, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes until he saw stars. God damn it. It was just a dream. It wasn't real. He was Katsuki Bakugo. He was dynamite. He was the number 5 goddamn hero. He wasn't a kid anymore. But the fear felt real. It was a cold knot in his stomach, a tremor in his hands that had nothing to do with his quirk. He threw the covers off and stalked into his pristine, minimalist bathroom. He didn't turn on the light. He braced his hands on the cool marble sink and stared at his reflection in the dark window. The face that looked back was pale, eyes wide and haunted. For a terrifying second, he saw the ghost of the boy from his dream. This was the truth. This was the rot at the core of it all. It wasn't about career prospects or media strategy. Those were just excuses, logical frameworks he built to contain a fear that was utterly primal. It was the terror of being that boy again. The boy everyone laughed at. The boy who was weak. Being with Izuku, really being with him, out in the open, felt like handing the world a weapon. It felt like confirming every whispered doubt, every nasty childhood taunt. It felt like admitting that the strongest part of him, the part that needed and loved and cherished, was also the part that made him vulnerable to being utterly destroyed. Loving Izuku was the easiest thing he'd ever done. It felt like coming home. But the world seeing it? That felt like walking into the schoolyard and handing his lunch money to every bully who had ever looked at him wrong. He splashed cold water on his face, the shock of it helping to ground him. He glared at his reflection, at the man he had built himself into. "Get it together," he snarled at the mirror. His voice was low, rough with sleep and fear, but it was his. An adult's voice. "You're not weak. You're the strongest." He repeated it like a mantra. The prayer. He dressed for his early morning patrol with sharp, angry movements, trying to outrun the lingering chill of the nightmare. He didn't call Izuku. He couldn't. How could he explain? How could he say, "I had a nightmare that holding your hand would turn me into a effin' loser"? Izuku would look at him with those understanding eyes, and he would say something gentle and true, and it would somehow make the shame even worse. So he buried it. He locked the fear deep down where it belonged, beneath layers of arrogance and explosive power. He armored up. But as he left his silent apartment, the echo of the dream followed him. A tiny, relentless whisper in the back of his mind. The pounding on the door was less a knock and more a sustained, rhythmic assault. "Bakubro! Open up. We know you're in there." Kaminari's voice, slurred and sing-song, echoed down the hall. "We brought." "What did we bring again?" That was Mina's voice, followed by a giggle and the sound of a bag rustling. Katsuki Bakugo froze mid-motion, his spoon hovering over a pot of violently spicy curry. His eyes, wide and alarmed, snapped to Izuku's across the kitchen island. Izuku's own face had gone pale. He was perched on a stool, wearing a pair of Katsuki's sweatpants and an old UA t-shirt, his hero suit neatly folded on a chair in the bedroom. A casual, domestic scene that was about to be exposed as a federal crime. "Sheet," Katsuki hissed, dropping the spoon. It clattered against the pot. "Sheet, sheet, sheet." The pounding continued. "Kun-man, we saw your light on. We got snacks. And stuff." "It's them," Izuku whispered, stating the obvious, his mind already racing through a dozen terrible outcomes. "They can't see me here." "No sheet, they can't." Katsuki whisper yelled, his head whipping around the apartment as if looking for a place to stash a full-grown, 6-foot top hero. His pristine, minimalist apartment offered 0 hiding spots. The bathroom. Don't make a sound. Izuku didn't need to be told twice. He moved like he was on a stealth mission, sliding off the stool and darting across the open living space just as Katsuki stomped toward the door. "I'm coming, you demon extras. Stop wrecking my door." Katsuki bellowed, buying Izuku precious seconds. Izuku slipped into the bathroom, closing the door with a nearly silent click. He leaned against it, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was ridiculous. This was humiliating. He was the number 4 pro hero, hiding in a bathroom because Katsuki's friends had shown up unannounced. Outside, he heard the door swing open. What? Katsuki's voice was a flat, dangerous blade. Party time? Mina cheered, and the sound of 2 pairs of unsteady feet stumbling into the apartment followed. Dude, your place is so clean. It's weird, Kaminari observed. We brought, oh yeah, pizza. Is this salsa? Why did we bring salsa? It was on sale. Mina defended. Katsuki groaned. It's 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Are you too drunk? A little, Kaminari admitted. Patrol was rough. Needed to unwind. And you weren't at the usual bar. 'Cause I'm making dinner, you idiot. Izuku held his breath, listening. He could picture the scene perfectly. Katsuki, arms crossed, blocking the path further into the apartment. Mina and Kaminari, cheerful and oblivious, swaying in the gen-can. Oh, curry! Mina's voice was moving. She was heading for the kitchen. Smells amazing. You never cook for us. That's 'cause you're not invited. Get out of my kitchen. 2 bowls. Kaminari's voice, now laced with genuine confusion, cut through the noise. Silence. Izuku's blood ran cold. The second bowl. He'd already set the table. I was hungry, Katsuki snapped too quickly. I made a lot. It's called meal prepping, dunce face. Ever heard of it? Meal prepping with 2 placemats? Mina asked, her voice dripping with playful suspicion. And 2 drinks? What's going on, Bakugo? You got a lady friend over? She said it like it was the most scandalous, hilarious thing in the world. Kaminari howled with laughter. As if. Katsuki's roar was so loud the bathroom door vibrated. I was about to watch a DMN movie. Now get the hell out before I blast you both through the wall. Okay, grumpy. Mina laughed. We're going, but we gotta use the bathroom first. That salsa's... Wow. Izuku's eyes widened in sheer panic. No. He heard footsteps approaching. His head swiveled around the bathroom. A large, walk-in shower. A single vanity. No closet. Nowhere to hide. No! Katsuki's voice was suddenly right outside the door. Izuku heard a thud as he presumably slammed his body against it. You are not using my bathroom. It's being cleaned. Chemicals. You'll melt your stupid brains. Since when do you clean? Kaminari asked, his voice right on the other side of the door. Izuku could almost smell the pizza on his breath. Since now. Get out. Out. What followed was a chaotic symphony of yelling, protesting, and the sound of 2 very drunk heroes being physically manhandled back toward the front door. There was a final shouted threat from Katsuki, the slam of the door, and then silence. A heavy, profound silence. Izuku didn't move. He stayed pressed against the door, listening to the frantic beating of his own heart. The adrenaline slowly receded, leaving behind a cold, sick feeling in the pit of his stomach. After a full minute, there was a soft knock on the door. They're gone. Izuku slowly turned and opened the door. Katsuki stood there, looking more frazzled than Izuku had seen him in years. His hair was slightly mussed, and a fine sheen of sweat was on his brow. For a long moment, they just stared at each other in the hallway, the remains of their almost dinner cooling on the island. The comedy of the situation had evaporated, leaving only the stark, ugly reality. That was... Izuku began, his voice hoarse. AVNG disaster, Katsuki finished, running a hand over his face. He looked tired. Those nosy idiots. He trailed off, but the unspoken words hung in the air between them. They almost found out. Izuku looked past him at the 2 placemats, the 2 bowls, the 2 glasses of water. A snapshot of a simple, normal night that they couldn't have. That Katsuki wouldn't allow them to have. The fear from the gala, the clarity from their fight, it all coalesced into a single, sharp point. How long can we keep doing this, Kaken? Izuku asked quietly. The question wasn't accusing. It was just exhausted. Katsuki's jaw tightened. He didn't have an answer. He just turned and walked back to the kitchen, picking up the second bowl and dumping its contents violently into the sink. We just can, he said, his back to Izuku. We have to. But the words sounded hollow, even to him. The fortress had been breached, not by villains, but by drunk friends and a jar of salsa. And they both knew it was only a matter of time before the walls came down for good. The air in downtown Muzutafu was thick with dust and the ozone crackle of panic. A massive villain, his quirk allowing him to merge with and manipulate construction equipment, had gone on a rampage. He was a hulking monstrosity of twisted rebar and grinding concrete, swinging a wrecking ball fist the size of a compact car. Dynamite was in his element. "Is that all you got, you walking junkyard?" he roared, blasting himself in a high arc over a swiping crane arm. He landed on the thing's shoulder, planting his hands. Die! A concussive explosion blasted chunks of concrete and steel from the villain's form, making him bellow in rage and pain. But it wasn't enough. The damage began to slowly knit itself back together, scavenging material from a half-demolished building. Nearby. "He's regenerative as long as he has a material source." Deku's voice, calm and analytical, crackled over their private comms line. "Kaken, you're a distraction. Keep his attention focused on you." "I need 30 seconds. "You got 20, nerd." Katsuki barked back, but a feral grin split his face. This was the dance. This was what they did. He launched into a frenzied aerial assault, a whirlwind of explosions and taunts, drawing the villain's ire completely. He was a blazing, noisy beacon of pure aggression. Below, a blur of green and black shot through the chaos. Deku wasn't fighting the villain, he was fighting the environment. Using Black Whip, he swung through the unstable construction site, his eyes scanning, calculating. The central support pylon for the crane he's using. Izuku's voice was a focused murmur in Katsuki's ear. "It's compromised from your last blast. If we can, force him to put his weight on it and take out the base." Katsuki finished, already seeing the same solution. "I'll drive him left. You get ready to pull it down." "Right." There was no hesitation. No second-guessing. It was a single thought in two bodies. Katsuki changed his attack pattern, hurting the enraged villain like a sheepdog, his explosions strategically cutting off escape routes, forcing him to step back toward the unstable crane base. "Now, Deku!" "On it!" A black tendril shot out, not at the villain, but at the base of the crane's support pylon. At the same instant, Katsuki unleashed a massive AP shot right at the villain's face, not to damage him, but to make him flinch, to take one final heavy step back. The villain's massive foot came down squarely on the weakened area of the platform. With a shriek of protesting metal, the pylon gave way. The crane, the villain's primary weapon and source of material, began to topple. The villain roared, off balance, his form destabilizing as his connection to the crane was severed. It was the opening they needed. Smash! Deku yelled, shooting upward, the air pressure from his fist creating a localized vortex. Howitzer! Impact! Katsuki screamed from above, a complementary sunburst of explosive force. Their attacks met in the center of the villain's chest, a perfect, devastating convergence of raw power and pinpoint accuracy. The shockwave blew out the windows of the surrounding buildings for a block. The concrete monstrosity shattered, revealing the dazed, human villain within, who was promptly wrapped in Black Whip before he could hit the ground. Silence descended, broken only by the creak of settling wreckage and the distant wail of sirens growing closer. Katsuki landed lightly amidst the debris, chest heaving, smoke curling from his palms. Izuku landed beside him, green energy flickering and fading around his body. For a moment, they just stood there, side by side, surveying their work. The air hummed with the aftermath of their combined power. It was a feeling unlike any other. It was completion. Then the world rushed back in. Cheers erupted from the crowds held back behind the police barricades. Cameras flashed. News helicopters circled overhead. Dynamite. Over here. Incredible work, you two. The power duo does it again. Katsuki's public persona snapped back into place. He shoved his hands in his pockets, throwing a glare toward the cameras. "Teeth, took you long enough to show up," he grumbled, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. "I had it handled." Izuku, ever the diplomat, stepped forward, smiling warmly though he was clearly exhausted. The priority was minimizing collateral damage and ensuring civilian safety. "We're just glad we could help." They fell into their well-rehearsed routine for the press, the perfect picture of friendly rivalry and professional respect. But underneath it, the energy was different. The synergy of the fight still thrummed between them, a live wire. As they turned to give their statements to the lead police detective, Katsuki's shoulder brushed against Izuku's. It was an accident, a tiny, meaningless contact in the midst of the chaos. But Katsuki didn't flinch away. And Izuku, for a fraction of a second, leaned into it. It was nothing. It was everything. It was a glimpse of a world where they didn't have to hide. Where they could stand together, not just as the power duo, but as partners in every sense of the word. Where a touch after a battle well fought wouldn't be a secret shame, but a quiet celebration. The moment lasted less than a heartbeat. Then they parted, falling back into their roles. But the image was seared into Izuku's mind. The effortless way they worked together. The perfect, unspoken understanding. The sheer rightness of it. He watched Katsuki preen under the adoration of the crowd, boasting about his role in the takedown, and his heart ached with a love so fierce it was painful. This was what they were. This was what they could be. And the chasm between that truth and the lie they lived every day had never felt wider or more desolate. The silence in Izuku's apartment was a stark contrast to the roaring chaos of the city center just an hour before. The air still hummed, but now it was with residual adrenaline and unsaid words. Katsuki was sprawled on the sofa, one arm thrown over his eyes. The sharp, acrid scent of smoke and ozone still clung to his hero suit, which was strewn across the floor. He was riding the high of a perfect victory, the echoes of the crowd's cheers still a pleasant buzz in his veins. Izuku moved around the kitchen, preparing 2 glasses of water. His body ached with a familiar, deep exhaustion, but his mind was racing, replaying every millisecond of the fight. The flawless synergy. The way they'd moved as one mind. The brush of Katsuki's shoulder against his. He brought the water over, setting 1 glass on the coffee table near Katsuki. He didn't sit. He stood there, watching the steady rise and fall of Katsuki's chest. "Your cluster maneuver," Izuku began, his voice soft in the quiet room. "When you drove him toward the crane. The way you varied the blast radius to control his momentum without causing unnecessary structural damage. I've never seen control like that. To us. It was perfect, Kaken. It was the truth. It was worship. It was the offering he always laid at Katsuki's feet." A grunt was his only reply. Katsuki didn't move his arm from his eyes. The high from the fight began to curdle inside Izuku, mixing with the cold dread that had been growing for weeks. He needed more than this. He needed to talk about the brush of shoulders. The unspoken communication. The us of it all. He took a breath, steadying himself. Felt good today, didn't it? Working together like that. It felt right. Katsuki finally lowered his arm. His eyes were sharp, assessing. Not looking at Izuku, but at the memory of the fight. Course it felt right. We're the best. Took down that overgrown rock pile without a scratch. The stats are gonna be insane. He said it like he was already drafting the press release in his head. Izuku's heart sank. He wasn't talking about the stats. He tried again, stepping closer. "That's not what I meant. It's out there. It's more than just stats. It's this connection. Don't you ever think about what it would be like if we didn't have to hide that? If we could just be that? All the time?" Katsuki's posture shifted. The relaxed victory pose was gone, replaced by a familiar, defensive tension. He sat up, fixing Izuku with a narrow-eyed glare. "There you go again. Always gotta talk about feelings. Can't you just let a win be a win?" The words were like a door slamming shut. "This isn't just about feelings," Izuku said, an edge of desperation creeping into his voice. "It's about the truth of what we are. What we just did out there. That's us, Kaken. That's who we are together. Why is that something we have to keep in the dark? Because the truth is nobody's business but ours." Katsuki shot back, standing up. The space between them felt charged, dangerous. "What we are is a DMN good team in the field. That's it. That's all anyone needs to know. Is that all we are? The question hung in the air, quiet and devastating. Katsuki flinched just barely. He looked away, his jaw working. You know what I mean. No, Izuku whispered, the fight draining out of him, leaving behind a profound weariness. I really don't. He looked at the man in front of him. The hero who could calculate the trajectory of 100 exploding shards of debris in a nanosecond, but couldn't articulate a single emotion. The man who would gladly accept praise for his strength but would rather self-destruct than acknowledge the source of it. He understood then, with crystal clarity. Katsuki could only accept love when it was framed as admiration. When it was about his power, his skill, his brilliance. He could bask in the glow of being worshipped. But to be loved? To be seen in his entirety, the strength and the vulnerability, the hero and the man who needed someone to hold him after a nightmare? That required a reciprocity he was incapable of. That required a vulnerability he saw as a fatal weakness. Love, real love, wasn't a prize to be won. It was a bridge to be built between two people. And Katsuki was only willing to stand on his side of the chasm, demanding that Izuku shout his praise across the void. Izuku had been shouting for years. His voice was getting hoarse. He took a step back, the movement final. I'm going to take a shower, he said, his voice flat. Katsuki said nothing. He just stood there, a statue of stubborn pride and unacknowledged fear, watching Izuku walk away. The bathroom door closed, and the lock clicked into place. A soft, definitive sound. Alone in the living room, Katsuki stared at the closed door. The afterglow of the fight was completely gone, replaced by a cold, hollow feeling. He'd won the battle against the villain. But he had a sinking feeling he'd just lost something else entirely, and he didn't even know how to name it. He picked up the glass of water Izuku had brought him. It was cold and impersonal. He drank it anyway, but it did nothing to quench the sudden, aching thirst he felt for something he would never allow himself to have. The UA Teacher's Lounge was a haven of controlled chaos. Lesson plans were spread across tables, the smell of strong coffee warred with the scent of whiteboard markers, and the low hum of conversation was punctuated by the occasional frustrated sigh or triumphant chuckle. Izuku sat grading papers, the rhythmic scratch of his red pen a soothing mantra. Here, surrounded by the evidence of growth and potential, the tangled mess of his personal life felt distant. Here, he could focus on what was clear, what was true, helping the next generation find their strength. And so I told him, your quirk isn't a hammer, and not every problem is a nail. Ms. Joke was saying, gesturing wildly with a half-eaten apple. But you try telling that to a kid who can turn his arms into actual hammers. A round of laughter went through the lounge. Izuku smiled, but it was automatic. His mind was only half present. The door to the lounge opened, and a first-year student, a boy named Ryo with a quirk that let him harden his skin like pumice stone, peeked in, looking nervous. Midoriya-sensei? Sorry to bother you. Izuku looked up, immediately setting his pen down. It's no bother, Ryo-kun. What's up? The boy shuffled in, clutching a tablet to his chest. It's about the essay on quirk application in urban rescue scenarios. I was reviewing the footage you suggested of the Kyushu earthquake, the one where you and Dynamite work together. Izuku's smile tightened imperceptibly. Oh, yes. It was. Wow. Ryo's eyes were wide with hero worship. The way you two communicated without even talking? It was like you shared a brain. It's the coolest thing I've ever seen. The praise, so similar to what he lavished on Katsuki privately, felt like a knife twist. It's about trust and understanding your partner's capabilities, Izuku said, keeping his voice even, teacherly. Yeah, Ryo agreed, then his expression turned thoughtful, almost shy. Everyone always talks about you guys as this amazing team. The power duo. Do you think that kind of partnership is? I mean, is it like? He fumbled, his cheeks turning pink. My friend says it's like you're, in love or something. The lounge didn't go quiet. The chatter continued. But to Izuku, the world telescoped down to the nervous boy in front of him and the painfully innocent question. He saw the curiosity, the hope. He remembered being that age, looking at All Might and seeing not just a hero, but an ideal. A symbol of truth. He thought of Katsuki's furious denial at the barbecue. The panic in his eyes at the mere suggestion. He thought of his own answer to his class weeks ago, the lie that had tasted like ash. He couldn't do it again. He took a breath, and for the first time, he didn't offer a deflecting laugh or a hollow platitude about professionalism. Ryo-kun, he said, his voice gentle but firm. What me and Dynamite have is a very strong professional bond built on years of friendship and shared goals. It's something I'm very proud of. It was still not the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie. It was a careful stepping stone. He leaned forward, his expression serious. But what people choose to do in their personal lives, who they love, that's their business. And it has nothing to do with their ability to be a hero. A hero's worth isn't measured by that. Ryo blinked, absorbing this. So, it wouldn't matter? If a hero loved another hero? Anyone. It wouldn't change how they save people, Izuku said, his heart aching with the certainty of it. It might even make them better. Because loving someone, truly loving them, requires courage, and empathy, and strength. All the things a hero needs. He was no longer just talking to Ryo. He was preaching to himself, affirming the values he was failing to live by. The boy's face broke into a relieved smile. Oh, that makes sense. Thanks, sensei. He scurried out looking lighter. The moment he was gone, the weight returned to Izuku's shoulders. He had told the truth. A partial, sanitized truth, but it was a start. He had given that boy a better answer than the one he himself was living. He became aware of a presence beside him. He looked up to see Shota Aizawa, wrapped in his yellow sleeping bag like a grumpy caterpillar, sipping a juice pouch. His dark eyes were fixed on Izuku, unblinking. He'd heard everything. Aizawa said nothing. He didn't need to. His gaze was heavy with a knowing, weary understanding that saw right through the carefully constructed walls of every person in the room. He took a long, slow sip from his juice pouch, his eyes never leaving Izuku's. Then, with a final, almost imperceptible nod, he shuffled away. It wasn't approval. It wasn't disapproval. It was acknowledgement. Izuku turned back to his papers, but the words blurred in front of his eyes. He had just given his student a lesson in courage and integrity. It was time to start teaching himself. The gym at Dynamite's agency was a brutalist masterpiece of polished concrete and reinforced steel. It smelled of sweat, ozone, and pure, unadulterated aggression. It was Katsuki's sanctuary, the place where he could burn off the toxic energy that crackled under his skin. Today, it wasn't working. You were amazing, Kaken. Is that all we are? The click of a bathroom lock. The thoughts were on a loop, a taunting, relentless soundtrack to the pounding beat of his fists against the reinforced punching bag. Each impact was a satisfying thwump that shuddered up his arms, but it did nothing to quiet the noise in his head. All right, man, my turn. Kirishima's voice was a cheerful boom, cutting through the haze. He was already shirtless, his skin hardened to a rough, jagged texture, an eager grin on his face. Sparring session. Best of 3. Let's get manly. Normally, this was their ritual. A way to blow off steam, to test their limits, to communicate in the language they both understood best, controlled violence. Today, Katsuki just saw a target. He didn't wait for Kirishima to finish stretching. He didn't settle into a ready stance. He just launched himself forward with a wordless snarl, a right hook aimed straight for Kirishima's hardened jaw. It was too fast, too angry. Not the opening move of a spar, but a genuine attack. What? The sound was like 2 bricks colliding. Kirishima's head snapped to the side from the force, though his quirk prevented any real damage. The cheerful grin vanished, replaced by stunned surprise. Whoa, dude. Warn a guy, he laughed, but it was uneasy. He brought his arms up. Okay, we're starting hot. I see you. Katsuki didn't answer. He pressed the attack, a relentless barrage of explosive jabs and kicks. He wasn't fighting to test his skill. He was fighting to obliterate, to silence the voices. Hey, slow down. Kirishima grunted, blocking a kick that would have shattered a normal person's leg. He was on the defensive, his hardened skin deflecting the blows but the sheer, furious force behind them driving him back. "Bakugo! What's your deal today?" "Shut up!" Katsuki roared, swinging wildly. "Just fight." He was leaving openings. Big, sloppy, reckless openings. An unspoken rule of their spars was to never actually try to hurt each other. Katsuki was breaking it. Kirishima's eyes narrowed. He stopped backing up. He took a kick solidly to his ribs, gritting his teeth against the impact, and used the moment to shove forward, grabbing Katsuki's arm. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and serious, all traces of laughter gone. His grip was like iron. "What is going on with you?" The concern in his voice was the final straw. It felt like pity. It felt like someone seeing the crack in his armor. Katsuki wrenched his arm free, sparks flying from his palm. "Nothing is going on," he screamed, the lie tearing from his throat. "I'm fine. Why does everyone keep asking me that?" "Because you're acting like you're about to explode." Kirishima shot back, his own frustration rising. "You've been a powder keg for weeks. You blew up at Denki and Mina for a stupid joke, you've been ignoring my texts, and now you're trying to take my head off in a friendly spar. This isn't you, man. You don't know a demon thing about me." The words were a venomous spray. He was breathing heavily, chest heaving, his hands smoking. He was cornered, and like a cornered animal, he lashed out at the one trying to help. "I know you're my best friend." Kirishima's voice rose to match his own hard exterior beginning to show a fracture. "I know when something's wrong. So whatever this is, whatever you're dealing with, you can talk to me. That's what being manly is. It's not just being strong, it's trusting your friends to have your back." The word trust was a lance through Katsuki's heart. It was the one thing he couldn't do. Not with this. The fight drained out of him as suddenly as it had begun. The anger evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion. He looked at Kirishima, really looked at him. At his friend's worried, earnest face, the confusion in his eyes. He was offering an olive branch, and Katsuki was setting it on fire. He couldn't do it. He couldn't tarnish Kirishima's unwavering, simple view of friendship and strength with the messy, shameful reality of his secret. He couldn't bear to see the look on his face if he knew. He turned away, shoulders slumping. "Just drop it, shitty hair," he muttered, the words barely audible. All the fire was gone, replaced by ash. He walked away from the mats, away from his best friend, and grabbed his towel. The silence he left behind was heavier than any punch he'd thrown. Kirishima stood alone in the middle of the gym, his hardening receding, leaving behind just a confused and deeply concerned young man. He watched Katsuki's retreating back, the uncharacteristic slump of defeat in his posture. He'd seen Katsuki angry 1,000 times. He'd seen him frustrated, arrogant, and determined. But he'd never seen him look broken. And for the first time in their long friendship, Kirishima didn't follow him. The words had hit a wall, and the wall had won. He stayed rooted to the spot, the cheerful sparring session now a distant memory, replaced by the cold certainty that something was very, very wrong. And his friend was refusing to let him help. The fight had been a nasty one. A villain with a shrapnel quirk had turned a city block into a deadly whirlwind of jagged metal. It was the kind of fight that favored Deku's speed and precision over Dynamite's raw power. Katsuki had taken the brunt of it, using his larger explosions as a shield to cover evacuating civilians. It was a hero's move, a selfless one, and it had left his arms and torso a crosshatch of deep, bleeding gashes. Now, he sat on the closed lid of the toilet in Izuku's bathroom, shirtless and rigid, as Izuku carefully cleaned a particularly nasty cut along his ribs. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and blood. Izuku's touch was clinical, practiced a hero's touch. But his brow was furrowed in concentration, his movements gentle with a care that went beyond mere professionalism. "This one might need stitches," Izuku murmured, his fingers lightly pressing the edges of the wound. "I can call recovery girl." "No," Katsuki bit out, his voice tight with pain. "Just bandage it. It's fine." "Kaken, it's really deep." "I said it's fine." Izuku sighed but didn't push. He reached for the roll of gauze, his movements efficient. The silence stretched, filled only with the rustle of bandages and Katsuki's sharp, controlled breaths. This was their pattern. Injury. Patch-up. Silence. It was a language they knew well. But tonight was different. The silence felt charged, fragile. The fight with Kirishima, the cold distance that had grown between them since the shower door had clicked locked it all hung in the air, a ghost in the steam-filled room. Izuku's fingers brushed against a bruise blooming over Katsuki's heart as he taped the gauze in place. Katsuki flinched, a full-body shudder that had nothing to do with pain. And then it happened. The words were so quiet, so raw, they were almost inaudible. They were ripped from a place so deep inside Katsuki that he seemed to surprise himself by saying them. "I need you." Izuku's hands stilled. The world stopped. He couldn't have heard right. Katsuki Bakugo did not need. He conquered. He demanded. He took. He did not need. Izuku slowly lifted his gaze. Katsuki wasn't looking at him. He was staring at the tiled wall, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. His eyes were wide, not with anger, but with a kind of terrified shock, as if the words had been a hostage he'd accidentally set free. For a single, breathtaking second, the walls were down. The fortress was empty. Izuku saw not the number 5 hero, but the man beneath, exhausted, in pain, and desperately, utterly afraid of being alone. It was the man from the rain-soaked street. It was the man he loved. Izuku's heart cracked open. All the frustration, the hurt, the resentment, it all washed away in the face of this rare, precious vulnerability. This was what he waited for. This was the truth. He reached out, not to continue bandaging, but to cup Katsuki's cheek, to turn his face gently away from the wall. His thumbs stroked over the sharp line of his jaw. "I know," Izuku whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here, Kaken. I'm right here." He leaned forward, intending to press a kiss to his forehead, a seal on the promise. The moment shattered. Katsuki's eyes snapped into focus, the vulnerability evaporating like water on a hot plate. He recoiled as if Izuku's touch had scalded him, shoving his hand away. "Forget it," he snarled, the mask slamming back into place with brutal force. The fear in his eyes was now redirected outwards, transformed into fury. He stood up abruptly, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounds. He grabbed his torn, bloody shirt from the floor. "The bandages are fine. I'm going home." He didn't look back. He stormed out of the bathroom, out of the apartment, leaving the door swinging open behind him. Izuku was left kneeling on the cold tile, a roll of gauze in one hand, the ghost of a touch on the other. The echo of those 3 words, "I need you," lingered in the steam, a haunting, beautiful lie. And the echo of the 2 that followed, "Forget it," smashed what was left of Izuku's heart into dust. He had been offered a glimpse of the sun, only to have the door to the cellar slammed shut in his face. He knew then, with a final, devastating certainty, he could not live on glimpses. The joint training exercise was a massive, multi-agency affair designed to simulate a city-wide disaster. The air crackled with controlled chaos, the roar of simulated fires, the shouts of coordinated teams, the distant crump of practice explosives. Izuku was in his element, a whirlwind of green lightning and black whip, orchestrating a complex evacuation scenario with a team of younger heroes from Edgeshot's agency. His mind was a tactical map, calculating vectors and probabilities, a welcome respite from the tangled mess of his personal life. Then he saw them. Across the rubble-strewn simulated square, Dynamite and Lizardy were paired for search and extraction. And they were flawless. Tokage's quirk was a nightmare for any opponent, but a strategist's dream for a partner. She could split her body into dozens of autonomous pieces, each a set of eyes, a scout, a distraction. Katsuki, in turn, was a precision-guided missile. He didn't need to search. He just needed a target. Eyeball Piece spotted 2 civilians trapped under a mock collapse in Sector 7B. A detached, floating mouth announced near Katsuki's ear. "About time," Katsuki grunted, but there was no real heat in it. He blasted off, a straight, violent line through the chaos. "He's coming in hot, folks." Clear the blast zone, she yelled to a group of nearby sidekicks, who scattered with good-natured laughs. Katsuki landed, sized up the pile of debris, and let loose a perfectly measured series of AP shots. Chunks of concrete and rebar vaporized in precise bursts, clearing a path without disturbing the unstable pile around the victims. Clear and precise, dynamite, the floating mouth cheered. My other piece is guiding the medics in. Nice work. Course it was, Katsuki shot back, but he was already turning, looking for the next coordinates. Keep up, lizardy. Try and keep up with me, explodey, she retorted, her voice coming from 3 different directions at once. They moved like a well-oiled machine. Tokage's scattered, omnipresent awareness perfectly complemented Katsuki's focused, linear destruction. It was efficient. It was professional. And it made something sick and cold twist in Izuku's gut. He watched them, his own commands to his team becoming automatic. He watched the easy, teasing banter, the kind he used to share with Katsuki in the field. He watched Tokage's floating pieces orbit Katsuki like a mischievous asteroid belt, and he watched Katsuki tolerate it, even seem engaged by it. There was no tension, no hidden fear, no carefully constructed walls, because there was nothing to hide. To the world, and to Katsuki, this was what a partnership was supposed to look like. A powerful, charismatic man and a powerful, charismatic woman. A duo the media could ship without a second thought. A story that required no lies, no secrecy, no shame. A floating piece of Tokage, a single eye drifted near Izuku's position. It winked at him. Hey, Deku. Nice work on that building collapse. Your math is as scary as ever. It was friendly, professional, utterly normal. Izuku felt a smile stretch across his face, a perfect replica of his public persona. Thanks, lizardy. You two are cleaning up over there. Just following the boss's lead. The piece chirped before zipping away back to its hole. The smile dropped from Izuku's face the second it was gone. The boss. The exercise ended with their sector declared a success. Debriefings were quick. As heroes began to disperse, Izuku saw it. Katsuki was leaning against a scorched concrete barrier, gulping down a bottle of water. Tokage walked up to him, whole again, and said something that made him snort, a rough, almost laugh escaping his lips. He retorted with something short and sharp, and she grinned, nudging his shoulder with her fist in a companionable way. A casual, public touch. One that didn't make him flinch or explode. One that was allowed. Izuku turned away, the image burning behind his eyes. The easy camaraderie. The lack of fear. The perfect, acceptable picture they made. It wasn't that he thought anything was happening between them. He knew Katsuki. This was just professional compatibility. That was all. But that was the problem. This was what Katsuki wanted. A partnership that was only ever professional. A partnership that stayed on the surface, that asked for nothing, that demanded no vulnerability, that posed no risk to the fortress of his public image. Tokage could never unravel him. She would never see him break down in the rain. She would never hear a whispered, terrified, "I need you." She would never ask for more than he was willing to give. She was safe. And Izuku, with his bottomless love and his desperate need for truth, was the most dangerous thing in Katsuki's life. The jealousy he felt wasn't romantic. It was existential. He wasn't jealous of Tokage, he was jealous of what she represented. A life of ease and acceptance that would forever be denied to him. He stood there, amidst the celebrating heroes, and felt completely alone. The ultimatum, which had been a shapeless cloud of dread and necessity, suddenly crystallized into something hard, sharp, and inevitable. He couldn't do this anymore. He couldn't watch the man he loved choose a comfortable lie over a difficult truth. He couldn't stand in the shadows while someone else stood in the light beside him. The decision was made. It was time. The silence in Izuku's apartment had become a familiar character. It was no longer comfortable or expectant. It was funereal. Katsuki stood by the window, looking out at the city lights but seeing nothing. His arms were crossed, his posture the very picture of impatience. Izuku had called him over, his voice on the phone clipped and serious, offering none of the usual warmth. It had put Katsuki on edge immediately, and he'd responded with twice the usual aggression, a preemptive strike against whatever was coming. "Well," he finally bit out, not turning around. "I'm here. What's so important it couldn't wait? Some DMN analysis of the training exercise? Because if you're gonna critique my form, you can shove it." "I'm not going to critique your form, Kaken." Izuku's voice was quiet. It was the calm that came after a storm had passed, leaving only absolute certainty in its wake. It was more terrifying than any shout. Katsuki turned slowly. Izuku was standing in the middle of the room. He wasn't in his hero gear or lazy clothes. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt and dark jeans. He looked like he was ready to go somewhere. Or like he was already gone. "Then what?" Katsuki demanded, his bravado feeling thin and brittle. Izuku took a deep breath. He didn't wring his hands or look away. He met Katsuki's gaze directly, his green eyes clear and heartbreakingly sad. "I can't do this anymore." The words were simple. Final. Katsuki's heart gave a violent, painful lurch. "Do what?" he asked, though he knew. Of course he knew. "This," Izuku said, gesturing vaguely between them, encompassing the entire hidden world they'd built. "The secrets. The hiding. Lying to our friends. Waiting for you in the dark. We've been over this," Katsuki snarled, falling back on the old script, the familiar battle lines. "It's not lying, it's being smart. It's protecting what we have. Or do you want to see it all splashed across the front page of some shitty tabloid? You want to give them a weapon to use against us?" "I want to live my life," Izuku said, his voice gaining a sliver of steel. "I want to hold my partner's hand in public. I want to go to that stupid gala with you. I want to stop flinching every time our friends make a joke. I want to stop feeling like the best part of me is something to be ashamed of." "No one is ashamed," Katsuki roared, taking a step forward, his palms sparking. It was a lie so vast it echoed in the quiet room. "You are." Izuku's calm finally broke, his voice cracking with the force of his emotion. "You're so ashamed. You'd rather lose me than let anyone know. You'd rather pretend with Setsuna Tokage than be real with me." The accusation hung in the air. Katsuki stared at him, stunned. This wasn't the script. Izuku wasn't supposed to fight back like this. He was supposed to understand. He was supposed to yield. It's not about her," Katsuki stammered, uncharacteristically thrown. "It's about everything she represents." Izuku shot back. "A simple, easy, acceptable story." "Well, I'm not a story, Kaken. And what we have isn't simple or easy. It's messy and it's real and it's the most important thing in my life, and you're treating it like a dirty secret." He took a step closer, his eyes blazing with a pain so profound it stole the air from Katsuki's lungs. "I have spent years loving you. I have built my world around you. I have praised you and supported you and hidden for you. And I was fine with it. Because I thought one day you'd see that what we have is stronger than anything anyone could say about us." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But you don't see it. You're never going to see it." The fight drained out of Katsuki, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. This wasn't an argument. This was something else. "What are you saying, Deku?" he asked, his own voice barely a whisper. Izuku looked at him, and in that look, Katsuki saw the end of everything. "I'm saying I can't be your secret anymore." Izuku's voice was steady again, filled with a terrible, resolved finality. "So you have a choice. It's the only one I'm going to give you." He took one last, shuddering breath. "Either we tell the world. Together. Today. Or we're nothing at all." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of the universe holding its breath. Katsuki felt the words like a physical blow. Tell the world. The nightmare from weeks ago flashed behind his eyes, the laughing faces, the pointing fingers, the word weak echoing in an endless void. The fear was a cold fist around his heart, squeezing the air from his lungs. He saw his career crumbling. The respect he'd fought so hard for, turning to pity and ridicule. The dynamite persona, shattered, replaced by a headline, "Number 5 Hero's Secret Gay Affair." He couldn't do it. The choice was no choice at all. He looked at Izuku, at the man who had loved him unconditionally since they were 4 years old, and he saw the hope dying in his eyes. He saw that Izuku already knew his answer. The words wouldn't come. He just stood there, paralyzed by his own terror. Izuku watched him for a long moment, waiting for an answer that would never come. He saw the panic, the refusal, the cowardice. He saw Katsuki choosing the fortress over the man who wanted to live inside it with him. The last flicker of light in Izuku's eyes went out. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Okay," he whispered. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was just acceptance. He turned and walked to the door. He opened it and stood there, holding it open. Not looking at Katsuki. An invitation to leave. A finality. Katsuki stood frozen for another second, his mind screaming at him to say something, to do something, to fight. But the fear was too loud. It drowned out everything else. He walked toward the door, his steps heavy. He paused on the threshold, unable to cross it, unable to look back. "Deku," he started, but the sentence had no end. There was nothing left to say. Izuku said nothing. He just kept holding the door open, his gaze fixed on some point in the hallway beyond. And so, Katsuki Bakugo did the only thing his fear would allow him to do. He stepped over the threshold. And he walked away. The door clicked shut behind him, a soft, final sound that echoed in the empty hallway and in the ruins of his heart. Inside, Izuku slid down the length of the door until he was sitting on the floor. He drew his knees to his chest, buried his face in his arms, and finally, silently, let the tears come. It was over. The door clicked shut. The sound was a PRD at the end of a sentence that had been writing itself for years. Final. Absolute. Katsuki stood frozen in the hallway outside Izuku's apartment, his hands still partially raised as if to knock, to take it back, to say anything other than the devastating nothing he had said. The silence on this side of the door was different. It was vast and empty, ringing with the echo of his own cowardice. He could still see the look in Izuku's eyes, not anger, not even sadness anymore. Just a quiet, utter extinction of hope. A cold, sharp panic, sharper than any villain's blade, lanced through him. What have you done? His body moved before his mind could process it. He took a step back. Then another. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. He couldn't breathe. The walls of the hallway seemed to press in on him. The instinct was primal, overwhelming. He turned and practically fled down the hall, his footsteps unnaturally loud on the polished floor. He didn't take the elevator. He slammed through the door to the stairwell, taking the steps 2 and 3 at a time, his descent a chaotic, echoing crash. He burst out into the cool night air, gulping it down like a drowning man. He leaned against the rough brick of the building, his chest heaving. The city lights blurred into meaningless smears of color. You chose this. You chose nothing. The thought was an ice pick to the brain. He had walked away. He had chosen the lie, the image, the empty fortress, over the man who had been his home since childhood. A wave of nausea rolled over him. He squeezed his eyes shut, but all he could see was Izuku's face. The way it had looked when he'd praised him after a fight. The way it had looked when he'd whispered, "I need you," in the steam-filled bathroom. The way it had looked just minutes ago when it had shut down completely. He had done that. He had extinguished that light. A sound escaped him, a raw, choked thing that was half sob, half gasp. He slapped a hand over his mouth, stifling it. He couldn't break down. Not here. Not ever. Anger was easier. Safer. He grasped for it, clinging to it like a lifeline. He gave me an ultimatum. He backed me into a corner. This is his fault. His FENG fault for not understanding. For pushing. The excuses felt thin and pathetic even to him. They crumbled to dust against the memory of Izuku's calm, heartbroken resolve. Either we tell the world, or we're nothing at all. And Katsuki, in his silence, had chosen nothing. The panic began to curdle into a hot, familiar rage. It pushed off the wall, shoving his hands deep into his pockets to hide their trembling. He started walking, his pace quick and aggressive, with no destination in mind. He was dynamite. He was the number 5 hero. He didn't need anyone. He didn't need him. This was a weakness. A distraction. He was better off. He was stronger alone. He repeated the words in his head, a frantic, desperate mantra. He built the walls back up, brick by mental brick, sealing away the gaping hole that had just been torn in the center of his life. He walked for blocks, the city noise a dull roar in his ears. He ignored the few recognizing glances he got, his expressions so thunderous that no one dared approach. By the time he reached the sleek, cold silence of his own penthouse, the transformation was complete. The panic was buried deep, locked away under layers of furious, self-righteous denial. He slammed the door behind him, the sound echoing in the vast, empty space. He didn't turn on the lights. He stood in the darkness, breathing heavily. He was fine. He was alone. He was safe. He was the strongest. He stalked into his bedroom and yanked open the top drawer of his dresser. Inside, tucked under a pile of socks, was a single, faded All Might card, the one he'd stolen from Izuku a lifetime ago. A stupid, childish token he'd never been able to throw away. He stared at it for a long moment, his chest aching with a pain so profound he thought it might kill him. Then, with a snarl of pure fury, he snatched the card, ripped it in half, and threw the pieces across the room. They fluttered to the floor, two tiny, insignificant scraps of colored paper in the immense darkness. He stood there, watching them, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. The rage was a fire in his veins, but it couldn't warm the deep, permanent cold that was settling into his bones. He had made his choice. And for the first time in his life, Katsuki Bakugo felt the terrifying, absolute weight of what nothing truly felt like. 2 days. 48 hours of silence. The longest they had gone without speaking since the war. The texts had stopped. The shared patrol schedules were ignored. The world kept turning, oblivious to the cataclysm that had occurred in a quiet apartment hallway. Izuku didn't call. He didn't text. The ultimatum had been set. The choice had been made in Katsuki's terrible, telling silence. To reach out now would be to disrespect his own words, to show that his resolve was as flexible as Katsuki had always assumed it was. It wasn't. On the morning of the third day, Izuku went to Katsuki's agency. He didn't call ahead. He simply walked through the gleaming, modern lobby, past startled receptionists who knew better than to stop the number 4 hero, and rode the elevator to the top floor. To the office with dynamite etched into the frosted glass. He didn't knock. He opened the door. Katsuki was at his desk, scowling at a mission report. He looked up, and for a fraction of a second, something raw and unguarded flashed in his eyes: surprise, maybe even a sliver of hope. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a defensive, practiced scowl. "The hell are you doing here?" he grunted, leaning back in his chair, the picture of casual indifference. "I'm busy." The performance was pathetic. Izuku could see the tension in his shoulders, the white-knuckled grip on his pen. Izuku closed the door behind him. The office was all sharp angles, chrome, and glass. A trophy case of awards and press clippings. There was nothing soft here. Nothing personal. It was the perfect reflection of the man who occupied it. "You didn't call," Izuku said. His voice was calm. "Empty." Katsuki's eye twitched. "Yeah, and?" "Got nothing to say." "That's what I thought." Izuku took a few steps into the room but didn't sit. He stopped in front of the desk, a professional distance between them. "I just came to make it official." Katsuki's scowl deepened. He refused to look at Izuku, instead focusing on a paperweight on his desk. "Nothing to make official. You said your piece. I didn't want your shitty deal. It's over. We're done." He said the words like he was commenting on the weather. Like they didn't shatter the entire foundation of Izuku's life. Izuku just nodded. There were no tears now. No anger. He had cried them all out alone on his bathroom floor. All that was left was a hollowed-out certainty. "Okay," he said, echoing his word from the hallway. The simplicity of it seemed to infuriate Katsuki. He finally looked up, his red eyes blazing with a misplaced fury. "That's it. Okay? You waltz in here, drop your ultimatum, and now you just, well, accept it? You're not even gonna fight." It was a breathtaking display of hypocrisy. A last, desperate attempt to force Izuku into the old pattern to make him the one who was giving up, to make him the villain of this story. Izuku didn't take the bait. He looked at the man he had loved for over 2 decades, and he felt nothing but a profound, weary sadness. "You already fought for us, Kaken," he said softly. "And you lost." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Katsuki flinched, his bravado crumbling for a second, revealing the stunned, wounded man beneath. He had no retort. There was none. Izuku had fought for them every single day. By loving him. By hiding for him. By waiting. Katsuki's one job had been to be brave enough to meet him in the light. And he had failed. The fight went out of Katsuki. He looked down at his desk, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He had nothing left. The silence stretched, thick and final. "I'm going to go," Izuku said quietly. He turned to leave. There was nothing else to say. Deku. The name was a hoarse whisper. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't an insult. It was a plea. Izuku stopped, his hand on the doorknob, but he didn't turn around. He couldn't. If he saw his face, he might break. And he couldn't afford to break. Not anymore. He waited. But nothing else came. No apology. No change of heart. Just that one broken syllable hanging in the air between them, a final, failed attempt to hold on. It was the most honest thing Katsuki had said to him in weeks. Izuku closed his eyes. He took a slow, steadying breath. Then he opened the door and walked out. He didn't look back. He walked through the agency, down the elevator, and out into the bright, uncaring sunlight of the day. Behind him, in the office, Katsuki Bakugo sat perfectly still, staring at the door that had just closed for the last time. The silence in the room was no longer a comfort. It was a condemnation. The izakaya was too loud. The familiar chatter of their friends, the sizzle of the grill, the clink of glasses, it all felt abrasive, a dissonant soundtrack to the hollow ache in Izuku's chest. He sat between Uraraka and Ida, pushing a piece of grilled chicken around his plate with his chopsticks. He'd almost canceled. The thought of pretending, of forcing a smile, felt like lifting a weight too soon after a crippling injury. But canceling would have raised questions. And questions were a minefield. So he'd come. He wore his best Deku smile, the one he used for photo ops and reassuring civilians. It felt like a poorly fitted mask. Across the table, the chaos was in full swing. Mina was recounting a hilarious mishap from her latest patrol, and Kaminari was adding sound effects. Shiro was laughing and Kirishima was watching Katsuki. Katsuki was holding court at the head of the table, louder and more abrasive than usual. He was boasting about a takedown, his voice a sharp, aggressive blade cutting through the room's noise. He was performing. The King Explosion Murder Show was in full, obnoxious swing. But his eyes were flat. The usual fierce, competitive light in them was gone, replaced by a hard, glassy sheen. He wasn't engaging with the stories. He was dominating them, skiing all the air out of the room to fill a void only he could feel. And then the idiot tried to use a water quirk in a FING thunderstorm. Katsuki barked, slamming his palm on the table for emphasis. The dishes rattled. Can you believe it? Pathetic. I ended up having to short-circuit the whole block just to. Hey man, easy on the table, Kirishima said, his voice light but his eyes serious. They'll kick us out again. Katsuki's head snapped toward him. You got a problem with my story, shitty hair? No problem, Kirishima said, holding up his hands in a placating gesture, but his gaze didn't waver. Just maybe tone down the property damage a notch. It's a good story without it. It was a tiny thing, a normal bit of ribbing between them. But the look that passed between them was charged. Kirishima's look said, I see you. I see you spiraling. Katsuki's returning glare was a clear, vicious warning. Back. The moment passed as quickly as it came. Katsuki turned his aggression back on a hapless Kaminari, but the energy at the table had shifted. The laughter felt forced. Uraraka, seated beside Izuku, leaned in slightly. Her voice was a soft murmur meant only for him. You're quiet tonight? Izuku's Deku smile didn't slip. Just tired. Long week of lesson planning. It was a smooth, practiced lie. He'd gotten good at them. Uraraka didn't look convinced. Her brown eyes, usually so bright and cheerful, were sharp with concern. She glanced across the table at Katsuki's aggressive posturing, then back at Izuku's carefully neutral face. A tiny frown creased her brow. She didn't say anything else. She just reached under the table and gave his hand a quick, reassuring squeeze. The simple, kind gesture was almost his undoing. The hollow ache in his chest threatened to crack open. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to lay his head on the table and tell his best friend how his heart had been ripped out and how the world kept expecting him to act like it was still there. But he couldn't. It wasn't just his secret to tell. It was Katsuki's too. And despite everything, he couldn't betray that. He gave her hand a faint squeeze back and then pulled away, picking up his beer glass to give his hand something to do. The night wore on. Katsuki drank more, his boasts becoming sloppier, his insults losing their playful edge and gaining a genuine, cutting meanness. He was a bomb ticking down, and everyone was starting to notice the countdown. Finally, after a particularly cruel jab at Zero that left an awkward silence in its wake, Kirishima had enough. "All right, bro," he said, standing up and clapping a hand on Katsuki's shoulder. "I think you've had enough celebrating. Let's get you home." Katsuki shoved his hand off. "Get your diamond hands off me. I'm fine." "You're not fine," Kirishima said, his voice low and firm. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a statement. "You're being a JRK. And you're coming with me. Now." The use of JRK, instead of something more lighthearted like cranky, was a seismic shift. It was real disapproval. For a second, it looked like Katsuki might actually explode. His palms sparked on the table. But then he looked at Kirishima's set, disappointed face, and something in him seemed to deflate. The fight drained out of him, leaving behind a sullen, empty shell. He stood up, wobbling slightly. "Whatever. This place is boring anyway." He didn't say goodbye to anyone. He just turned and stalked out, Kirishima following close behind, a solid, worried shadow. The table was left in a stunned silence. "Wow," Kaminari whispered. "What's his damage lately?" Mina shook her head, her usual vivacity dimmed. "I don't know. But he's been like this for weeks." Their eyes, inevitably, drifted to Izuku. The other half of the equation. The one person who had always been able to either calm the storm or weather it with him. Izuku kept his eyes on his plate, the mask of his smile finally gone. He could feel their unasked questions hanging in the air. He couldn't do it. He couldn't sit there and pretend everything was normal for one more second. "I should go too," he said, his voice rough. He stood up, avoiding everyone's gaze. "Big day tomorrow. Thanks for the food." He didn't wait for their replies. He just left, walking out into the cool night air, leaving the noise and the warmth and the concerned faces behind. As he walked away, he knew the rumors would start. The speculation. The worried texts in a group chat he was probably about to mute. Their friends were starting to see the cracks. And for the first time, Izuku and Katsuki weren't standing together on the same side of the divide. They were the cause of it. The media cycle was a hungry beast, and it needed to be fed. In the vacuum left by the silent, private implosion of his relationship, Katsuki threw it raw meat. He gave interviews. Not the stiff, mandatory press conferences, but calculated, aggressive sit-downs with the most popular talk shows. He was sharper, more arrogant, more brutally honest than ever before. He insulted mediocre heroes by name, critiqued the Hero Commission's policies with scathing precision, and boasted about his own victories with a swagger that bordered on delusion. The public ate it up. Dynamite, unfiltered, and unapologetic. Is the number 5 hero too real for the hero world? Bakugo's lone wolf philosophy, "I don't need a pack to win." The headlines wrote themselves. His approval ratings, bafflingly, ticked up. There was a segment of the population that loved this new, unfettered version of him, the hero who gave zero sheets, who played by no one's rules but his own. He leaned into it. He stopped showing up to the izakaya. He ignored the increasingly worried texts from Kirishima. He was a solo act now. A one-man army. He took on riskier patrols alone, venturing into territories usually handled by teams. He pursued villains with a reckless, almost suicidal fervor, his takedowns more violent, more final than they needed to be. He was leaving a trail of scorched earth and terrified perps in his wake. It was all a performance. A spectacular, high-octane performance designed to scream one thing to the world. I am fine. I am better than ever. He was the strongest. He was alone. He was supposed to be alone. Teams were a weakness. Connections were a vulnerability. This was better. This was clean. He told himself this every morning in his silent, spotless penthouse. He shouted it in his head during every interview. He burned the words into his soul with every unnecessary explosion. He was running so fast and so loud he almost believed it. One afternoon, he was leaving his agency after a particularly vitriolic interview where he'd lambasted the sentimental, hand-holding approach of some top 10 heroes, a not-so-subtle dig at a certain symbol of hope that the interviewer had gleefully picked up on. A group of fans was waiting outside, held back by a single rope barrier. They cheered as he emerged, holding out merch for him to sign. "Dynamite! You were so awesome on Hero Talk today." "You tell him. We don't need weak heroes. You're the best. You don't need anyone." He signed a few posters with a sharp, aggressive scrawl, not making eye contact. The praise was a balm and a poison. It fed the beast of his ego while slowly starving everything else inside him. A young woman, her eyes shining with fervent admiration, moved a magazine toward him. It was a weekly hero gossip rag. The cover featured a paparazzi shot of him leaving a club alone, looking brooding and intense. The headline read, "Dynamite, the lone wolf howls at the moon." "Your new philosophy is so inspiring," she gushed. "It's so strong. To not need anyone." Katsuki's hand stilled. The pen hovered over the magazine cover. "Your new philosophy." The words echoed in the hollow space inside him. This wasn't a philosophy. It was a trauma response. It was a monument to his own failure. He looked at the girl's eager, naive face. She saw an ideal. A symbol of fierce independence. He saw a terrified, lonely boy building higher walls. He finished signing his name with a slash that nearly tore through the paper. He shoved the magazine back at her without a word and pushed past the crowd, his earlier swagger gone, replaced by a grim, urgent need to be anywhere else. He walked quickly, the cheers of the fans fading behind him. The words echoed in his skull. "You don't need anyone." He thought of warm, green eyes that had looked at him like he was the center of the universe. He thought of quiet praise in a dark apartment. He thought of a hand squeezing his under a table, and a voice that had once whispered, "I need you." The hollow ache in his chest, momentarily filled by the noise and the adrenaline, yawned open again, wider and deeper than before. He was the lone wolf. The unapologetic hero. The strongest. He was alone. And the silence of his victory was the most deafening sound he had ever heard. The silence in Katsuki's penthouse was no longer a curated choice. It was a physical presence. It had weight and density, and it pressed in on him from all sides. He stood in the Genkin, toeing off his boots. The routine was the same. Come home. Don't turn on the lights. Don't make a sound. But everything was different. He walked into the living room, his footsteps echoing on the polished concrete. The setting sun cast long, deep blue shadows across the minimalist furniture. It was pristine. Sterile. A museum exhibit titled, "The Life of a Man Who Needs No One." His eyes scanned the room, and for the first time, he truly saw it. The second pair of house slippers that were no longer tucked by the door. The ridiculously fluffy green pair Izuku had bought as a joke, insisting they were peak comfort. Katsuki had always grumbled, but he'd never thrown them out. They were gone. Izuku must have come by to get his things during a patrol. The thought was a fresh stab of pain. He'd been so careful, so quiet. He hadn't wanted a scene. Katsuki's gaze drifted to the kitchen. The second favorite mug, the one with a cartoon explosion on it that Izuku always used for tea because it made him smile, was missing from the dish rack. He walked, drawn by a morbid curiosity, into the bathroom. The counter was clear. No second toothbrush. No stupid, expensive hair product that smelled like forests and rain. No contact lens case. He yanked open the drawer. The extra pair of reading glasses Izuku kept for grading papers at his place gone. It was a systematic, quiet erasure. A retreat from the shared life they'd built in the shadows. Katsuki's heart began to pound, a slow, dull thud of panic. He stalked into the bedroom. The closet door was ajar. He swung it open. His side was perfectly organized, a regimented line of blacks, oranges, and grays. Izuku's side was empty. A single, lonely wire hanger swayed gently, clicking against the rod. That was all that was left. The breath left Katsuki's lungs in a rush. He leaned against the doorframe, suddenly lightheaded. He hadn't realized how much space Izuku had taken up. Not just in the apartment but in the air. The faint, clean scent of his shampoo. The soft muttering as he graded papers on the sofa. The warmth of another body in the king-sized bed that now felt vast and freezing. The apartment wasn't minimalist. It was empty. It was a shell. A cold, terrifying clarity washed over him. This was it. This was the nothing he had chosen. This silence. This emptiness. This perfect, pristine, lifeless monument to his own pride and fear. He had thought he was protecting something. His image. His career. His invulnerability. But standing in the echoing silence of his empty apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 quiet moments, he understood. There was nothing left to protect. He had been the king of a castle built on sand, and the tide had finally come in. And all he was left with was the chilling, absolute understanding that the thing he had been so terrified of losing, the respect, the strength, the power, was meaningless. It was all just awards in a case, clothes in a closet. And the one thing that had given it all meaning, warmth, and life was gone. Because he had told it to leave. A sound escaped him, a raw, broken thing that was part gasp, part sob. He slid down the doorframe until he was sitting on the cold floor of his walk-in closet, his back against the empty side. He drew his knees up, buried his face in his arms, and finally, in the crushing silence of his perfect apartment, Katsuki Bakugo allowed himself to feel the full, devastating weight of what he had done. The sunlight streaming through the high windows of Gym Gamma was warm and buttery. The air hummed not with the crackle of panic or the roar of explosions, but with the focused energy of young minds and bodies being pushed to their limits. That's it, Hannah. Feel the energy channel through your legs, not just your arms. You're a conduit, not a reservoir. Kenji, your control is incredible. Now, see if you can hold that frequency for 5 more seconds. Izuku's voice rang out through the gym, clear and encouraging. He moved between the small groups of students, a whirlwind of green and black, offering a correcting touch here, a word of praise there. He was in his element. This was a language he understood perfectly: growth, potential, unwavering support. A first-year girl, Yumi, was struggling. Her quirk allowed her to create small, localized gravity fields, but she kept losing focus, the fields collapsing or flaring out of control. Frustrated tears welled in her eyes. "I can't do it, sensei," she whispered, her shoulders slumping. "It's too hard. I'm gonna hurt someone." Izuku knelt down in front of her, putting himself at her eye level. He didn't touch her. He just offered a calm, steady presence. "Yumi-chan," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Look at me." She sniffled, wiping her nose with her sleeve, and looked up. "Your quirk isn't a weapon first," he said. "It's a tool. And like any tool, it takes practice. The fact that you're afraid of hurting someone means you have the most important tool already, a hero's heart. The control will come. I promise." He gave her a small, genuine smile. "Now try again. Smaller. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." The girl took a shaky breath, nodded, and focused. This time, the gravity field she created was the size of a dinner plate, wobbling but holding steady. Izuku's smile widened. "That's perfect. See? You're amazing." The word didn't taste like ash this time. It felt true. It felt right. This was how he was surviving. Hour by hour, lesson by lesson. By pouring the love he had nowhere else to give into these kids. by seeing their potential and reflecting it back to them, clear and unwavering. He wasn't fine. The pain was a constant, low hum in the back of his mind, a dull ache in his chest that never quite went away. Nights were the hardest, in the silence of his apartment, where the ghost of a presence was still too loud. But here, in the sunlight, surrounded by the eager, determined faces of his students, he could breathe. He could remember who he was outside of the secret, outside of the loss. He was Midoriya-sensei. He was Deku, the symbol of hope. And hope wasn't a feeling, it was a verb. It was something you did. It was showing up. It was believing in someone when they couldn't believe in themselves. He was, in a way, teaching himself how to hope again. After class, as the students filed out, chattering and laughing, Aizawa shuffled up to him, looking as perpetually exhausted as ever. "That was good work with Yumi," he said, his voice a low grumble. "She's been struggling with her confidence." "She just needed a little reassurance," Izuku said, wiping his brow with a towel. Aizawa's dark eyes studied him for a moment, seeing far more than Izuku wished he would. "And you?" he asked, the question deceptively casual. Izuku paused. He could have lied. He could have given the same deflecting answer he'd given Uraraka. But under Aizawa's flat, knowing gaze, it felt pointless. He looked out at the empty gym, at the sunlight on the polished floor. "Putting one foot in front of the other," he said quietly. It was the most honest thing he'd said to anyone in weeks. Aizawa was silent for a long moment. Then he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "That's all you can do sometimes," he said. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't offer pity. He simply acknowledged the truth of the struggle. "The students are lucky to have you." It was the highest praise Aizawa could give. He turned and shuffled away, leaving Izuku alone in the quiet gym. Izuku stood there for a moment, the words settling over him. He wasn't okay. But he was moving forward. He was taking the love that had been rejected and redirecting it, letting it fuel him instead of destroy him. He walked over to the window and looked out at the UA grounds. This was his home. This was his truth. He might have lost the secret war he'd been fighting in the shadows. But out here, in the light, he was still winning. The bank robbery was a simple, messy affair. A 2-bit villain with a metal manipulation quirk and a couple of desperate lackeys. The kind of thing that would normally be handled by a local patrol or a lower-ranked hero. Dynamite wasn't supposed to be there. But his agency scanners had picked up the police band, and he'd been in the air, chasing the high of a previous, equally unnecessary takedown. He'd diverted course without a second thought. He didn't call for backup. He didn't coordinate with the police already on the scene. He just dropped from the sky like an avenging angel made of nitroglycerin and rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice boomed, amplified by the speakers in his mask as he landed in the middle of the street, cracking the asphalt. Inside the command van, the police sergeant sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Do you mean it? Someone get Dynamite's agency on the line. Tell them to reel their boy in." We had a negotiator almost in position. But it was too late. Katsuki was already storming toward the bank's entrance. "Dynamite, hold your position." The sergeant's voice crackled over the open frequency all heroes were supposed to monitor. "We have hostages. We have a plan." Katsuki ignored it. The voice was just static. Just another thing trying to tell him what to do to hold him back. All he could see was the target. An enemy. Something to hit. Something to break. The metal villain emerged from the bank, using a civilian as a human shield, his free hand raised, morphing the bank's sign into sharpened spikes. "Stay back," the villain screamed, his voice pitched high with panic. "I'll do it. I swear I will." A sane hero would have stopped. Would have de-escalated. Would have followed the plan. Katsuki saw an opening. A fraction of a second where the villain's focus was on his threat, not on his shield. It was a stupid, insane risk. The calculus was all wrong. The chance of the civilian getting hit by shrapnel or a stray spike was far too high. He didn't care. His body moved. He didn't use a wide-area blast. He used a pinpoint, high-velocity AP shot aimed not at the villain's body, but at the hand he was using to manipulate the metal. It was a move of breathtaking, arrogant skill. and breathtaking, arrogant stupidity. The shot connected. The villain screamed, his control shattering. The metal spikes clattered to the ground. But the force of the blast, at such close range, sent the villain and the civilian stumbling back. The villain's free hand, wild with pain, lashed out, and a shard of shredded metal from the sign shot toward the civilian's chest. Katsuki was already moving. He blasted forward, not away from the danger, but into it. He shoved the civilian out of the way, taking the full force of the jagged metal shard in the side of his torso. It was a sickening, wet thud. The world went silent for a second. The police gasped. The villain stared, stunned. Katsuki looked down at the piece of rebar sticking out of his side. A strange, detached part of his brain noted it was probably nicking his liver. It hurt. A lot. He grabbed the shard with a gauntlet hand, his face a mask of grim fury, and yanked it out with a grunt. Blood immediately began to soak through his black suit. Then he turned his fury on the downed villain. The arrest that followed was not clean. It was brutal. And by the time the police swarmed in to take the sobbing villain into custody, Katsuki was standing over him, chest heaving, one hand clamped over the bleeding wound in his side. The civilian was safe. The villain was captured. The mission was, by any objective measure, a success. The police sergeant stormed up to him, his face pale with fury. What the hell was that, dynamite? You could have gotten that civilian killed. You could have gotten yourself killed. You went directly against orders. Katsuki turned his head slowly, his eyes glazed with pain and something darker. I got the job done, he slurred, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving a wave of nausea in its wake. Your plan was too slow. You're a demon liability, the sergeant shouted, losing his professional composure. Before Katsuki could retort, the world tilted. His knees buckled. Strong hands caught him before he hit the ground. Kirishima, his face a grim mask of fear and anger, having arrived just in time to see the tail end of the disaster. Medic! Kirishima yelled, lowering Katsuki to the ground, applying pressure to the wound. Now! Katsuki looked up at his friend's hardened face, the world swimming in and out of focus. Told you, he mumbled, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. I had it. Handled. Kirishima's expression didn't change. There was no admiration. No manly excitement. Just a deep, chilling disappointment. Yeah, Bakugo, he said, his voice flat and cold. You handled it. Really FNG handled it. The words hurt more than the piece of metal in his side. Then the medics were there, and the world faded to black, leaving Katsuki with the echoing sound of his best friend's voice, and the terrifying, blood-soaked proof that he was completely and utterly out of control. The pounding on his door was a familiar annoyance. Katsuki ignored it, staring blankly at the sports highlights on his giant TV, a bag of frozen peas held against his heavily bandaged side. The doctors had released him against medical advice. The penthouse was his recovery room. His prison. The pounding continued, more insistent. Then a voice, artificially cheerful. Bakugo! Open up. We know you're in there. We brought intervention supplies. Mina. Of course. Go away, he roared, wincing as the shout pulled at his stitches. We can't do that, man. That was Kaminari. It's an intervention. It's mandatory. We have a banner and everything. Shiro added. Katsuki groaned, letting his head fall back against the couch. He considered blasting the door off its hinges. But the effort seemed Herculean. The fight had gone out of him, leaving behind a dull, aching exhaustion. The door handle jiggled, then there was a series of clicks. A moment later, the door swung open to reveal Kirishima, holding a set of lockpicks, looking profoundly uncomfortable. Sorry, man, he muttered, not meeting Katsuki's eyes. They made me do it. They flooded in. Mina, holding a poorly hand-painted banner that read, Get better soon, at not being the worst. Kaminari with a box of Get Well donuts. Shiro with a ridiculously oversized therapy teddy bear. They stood in a semicircle in front of his couch, a rainbow of concern and awkwardness. Katsuki leveled a death glare at them. What the actual F is this? It's an intervention, dude. Mina announced, unfurling the banner with a flourish. You've been, like, super mega ultra grumpy lately. And not your usual, fun, I'm gonna murder everyone, grumpy. A sad, I might actually murder myself, grumpy. And you got yourself stabbed. Kaminari added, pointing a finger at the bag of peas. That's, like, the opposite of manly. We're worried, bro, Siro said, his usual laid-back demeanor replaced by genuine seriousness. You're pushing everyone away. You're not answering texts. You're being, well, a huge JRK. Katsuki's grip on the frozen peas tightened. I don't need a bunch of extras babysitting me. I'm fine. You're not fine. Mina insisted, planting her hands on her hips. You're about as fine as a phone at 1% battery. You're gonna shut down any second. Yeah. Kaminari jumped in. Your emotional operating system needs a serious update. You're all glitchy and prone to catastrophic failure. We just want to help, Siro said softly. They all looked at him, their faces a mixture of fear, frustration, and unwavering loyalty. They were trying. In their ridiculous, clumsy way, they were trying to reach him. The anger rose, hot and familiar. It was easier than the alternative. Easier than the guilt. Easier than the overwhelming urge to just tell them. I don't need your help, he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. I don't need your stupid banner or your DMN donuts. I don't need anyone. So you can take your intervention and get the hell out of my apartment. The words hung in the air, cruel and final. The cheerful facade on his friends' faces finally crumbled. Kaminari looked down at his shoes. Siro sighed, adjusting his grip on the teddy bear. Mina's shoulders slumped. Kirishima, who had been silent by the door, finally stepped forward. His expression was hard, his eyes filled with a pain that cut deeper than any villain's attack. We know you don't think you need us, Kirishima said, his voice quiet but firm. But that's the problem. You're pushing people away. You're trying to get yourself killed. And we're not just gonna stand by and watch you do it. He took another step closer, his gaze unwavering. You're my best friend, Bakugo. And I'm telling you, whatever this is, you don't have to face it alone. Talk to us. Please. Please, was what did it. For a single, heart-stopping second, the wall cracked. Katsuki looked at his friends, really looked at them. He saw their worry, their love, their willingness to look like complete idiots with a stupid banner and a therapy bear just for a chance to get through to him. The truth sat on his tongue, a bitter pill. I'm in love with Deku and I was too much of a coward to keep him, and now I'm so lost I don't know who I am without him. But the fear was a reflex, faster than courage. The shame was too great. The moment passed. The wall slammed back down, higher and thicker than before. He looked away, his jaw clenched. Get out, he whispered, the words devoid of all heat, leaving only a cold, empty dismissal. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Kirishima stared at him for a long moment. The concern in his eyes finally flickered and died, replaced by a deep, weary resignation. He'd thrown his best punch, and it had hit a wall he couldn't break. He nodded once, a short, sharp movement. Okay. He turned and walked out without another word. The others lingered for a moment, the fun of their failed intervention utterly gone. Then one by one, they filed out after him, leaving the banner, the donuts, and the giant teddy bear behind. The door clicked shut. Katsuki was alone again. He sat in the silence, surrounded by the evidence of his friend's care, and felt the hollowness inside him expand until he thought it might consume him whole. He had won. He had driven them away. He was alone. And it was the most complete and utter defeat of his life.